Propulsion continues to be normal.
RCPT pressure looks good. Toggling up. Roger roll with Atlantic.
Water towers can fly! Yes!
Echo Delta nominal.
Flight downside SCE off.
Again, SCE off.
Yikes. You bet. Okay. We don't need any more of these.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to NASASpaceflight's live coverage of Booster 7 operations down in Starbase, Texas. You're looking at a live view of Booster 7, which rolled out to the launch site late last week. And as you can see, teams are preparing to lift it onto the orbital launch mount. You can see the chopstick arms are near the top of the booster. And we have also heard a pad clear announcement. So it appears that the teams are getting ready to lift this booster onto the launch mount for what could be the final time before an eventual orbital test flight. My name is Thomas Burkhart, News Director for NASA Spaceflight. I'll be one of your commentators today. But it is not just me. I'm also joined by Alex here on commentary. Alex, how are you doing this morning? Or afternoon, I guess, where you are.
I'm doing great. Nice to see another lift of Booster 7 yet again. Hopefully the last time. Let's hope so.
The last time before lift off, you know what I mean?
There you go.
See what I did? Okay, anyway, moving on. We've also got Sawyer on commentary today. Sawyer, how are you doing? Welcome to your first Starbase stream.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be over on the Starbase side after doing a whole bunch of Cape coverage. And yes, hopefully we will see a liftoff soon after this lift. And maybe the next time the chopsticks hold that booster will be for a landing.
There you go. That would be fun. You can also get a view of Ship 24 hanging out by the launch site in this view, but that is not the star of the show today. Today, SpaceX should be installing Booster 7 onto the orbital launch mount. So a recap for those who may not have been following. Basically, Booster 7 conducted a couple static fires. We saw that coverage here on the NASA Spaceflight channel. And afterwards, they rolled the vehicle back to the production site for what Elon called robustness upgrades. Now, I don't know if that's actual upgrades or if that's code words for we broke the booster and had to do some repairs after all those static fires. I'm not super sure. But either way, Booster 7 has been ready to resume its test campaign. And so it looks like they're going to install it back onto the orbital launch mount. That would pave the way for additional static fire testing potentially. Could also pave the way if maybe the next static fires will involve a full stack, putting Ship 24 on top. And of course, there's a bit of evidence for that because Ship 24 is hanging out right next to the booster. Looks ready to be lifted by the chopsticks as well. I wouldn't expect that today or anything, but today would be the first step towards a full stack, which we have not seen with these particular boosters. And booster and ship, we only saw Ship 20 and Booster 4 once upon a time, and that was before the chopsticks were in use. So could be the first full stack with the chopsticks. Actually, no. Was there a chopsticks lift for the Polaris event? Or well, I guess it wasn't a Polaris event. They talked about it, but it was the Elon Musk Starship event. I guess they used the chopsticks for that one. So bad example on my part. But either way, potentially the path towards full stack here shortly. We'll keep you updated on the things we're looking at for the status of today's lift. The pad appears to be cleared, so honestly, lift could start any minute, and we'll point out as soon as we see something. But in the meantime, we'll also, of course, take your questions. So if you have any questions about today's stream or anything Starbase related, or Starship related, I guess, please tag us at NASASpaceflight as usual. I'll try to bring as many of those in as we can. And while those questions start to come in, Alex, do you want to give us a quick preview into the things you're looking for as far as an indicator as to when this lift might get underway?
Yes, so I have actually been seeing some people saying, why are you going live? Do you have any sort of inside information on when this is going to happen? I don't really think we have that kind of thing, but we do have indicators of when this lift might happen. And so we know that the QD arm, or the ship QD arm, has to be retracted, obviously, for the chopsticks to go up above the level. There you see the QD arm already retracted. The arms obviously need to take the weight of the booster. We saw that earlier. Also the stabilizers, the triangle things underneath the arms need to be in. We can see there they are in They are not all the way in. They have to be deployed later on. That's another step in the future. We'll talk about that later. But then on the transport stand at the bottom, there are also pins that are engaged, and so they go inside, and they are sockets on the booster on those box things that you can see there on the bottom, and that basically helps the booster to not sway as they lift the booster off the stand, and that kind of protects the engines from hitting the stand. So those are the sort of things that we look for when we are kind of preparing for going live for this kind of thing for a lift of booster 7 or any booster in general, obviously later on. But yeah, those were sort of the indicators. And if you go back to the one that they did in August 23rd, they did another lift of Booster 7 with the chopsticks, and the steps were sort of the same. It was like they had all the same steps, and obviously the problem back then was that the area around the stand was not clear. We actually went live a little bit earlier. I gotta admit it was my fault. I was like, "Hey, all the steps, they are all the pins and the stabilizers and all," and I was like, "Let's go live," and they trust me to be correct, but I was not correct at that point because the stand, the area around the stand was not clear. But right now it appears it is cleared, so we might see a lift anytime soon. Maybe a few minutes, maybe half an hour. We'll see. But hey, we're gonna stay here and chat and answer your questions as always.
Absolutely.
Yeah. As for the next step, one of the things that we should see is just the stand being booster 7 being cleared of the stand with the help of the pins on that transport stand. Then later, we'll see the stabilizers there on the arms. They're going to be deployed fully and engaged on the body of the booster. There are sockets there too, and then the pins on the transport stand will disengage, and then they'll lift the whole thing, and all the the lift procedures will continue as normal. That's sort of the next steps.
All right. Well, we'll shout those out when we see them, but we do have a healthy amount of questions coming in that we can talk about in the meantime. Again, tag us at NASASpaceflight in chat, and that'll help us see your questions, and we can start diving into those. And the first one is on the subject of the chopsticks. Those arms have multiple uses. They're going to be used today to actually integrate the vehicle onto the launch mount and actually basically install or uninstall both boosters and ships to the launch mount in preparation for flight. But of course, they also have the job of potentially catching a booster or even a ship, so that the vehicles don't need to have landing legs and they can just kind of land on the arms as a way to reduce the dry mass of these vehicles. So the question here from SpaceX Gamer asks if the grid fins could stand up to the task of holding the booster's weight if the lifting pins broke for some reason. I believe the purpose of having those lifting pins is so that the grid fins didn't have to be designed to hold the booster's weight, which would indicate that the grid fins can't. The grid fins obviously have their own aerodynamic properties and need to be able to cope with the forces of reentry and landing, those aerodynamic forces, but those are different from the lifting forces that they would expect the chopsticks to be supporting. And I believe the reason that they went with not using the chopsticks as another lifting point was so that they could design the load structure differently. Alex, am I on the right track there?
Yeah, I don't think that they will use the grid fins sort of like a backup there, because as you said, the whole purpose of having the pins there is just to design those for the catch rather than the grid fins. If you over design the grid fins for just in case situation, it's like if it's not gonna land right on the pins, it's not gonna land right on the grid fins either. So it's like, I don't think you should be wasting time on that. You have other big problems in that case.
Well, yeah, there's other
Yeah.
problems if your lift points fail.
And on, and on top of that, you're not only having to catch it at that point, these grid fins are also going to be torquing and moving the entire weight of the vehicle pretty much up until that catch point. So I don't think you want a last second adjustment with those
That's
right
true.
as it's catching it.
Yeah, that's a good point. Very good point. All right, we're going to hit our shuttle quota for the day already. Question number 2 brings in the shuttle reference, so here we go. Cole is asking, since Starship has less cross range than the shuttle, how many orbits before it can land at the same place it took off? Of course, the shuttle had that capability. In fact, it's what drove the big wingspan, right? So you're the requirement to be able to abort once around.
Oh God, I'm
Yeah,
seeing a
Starship.
car on the
Oh,
left view.
Oh no.
A car just arrived. Oh gosh.
all right. Well, we'll keep an eye on that. But in the meantime, so
But yeah, the delta wing design that they used for the shuttle was so that it had that extra kind of glide power if you needed to do the abort once around and do one orbit before returning. But I think it's also going to be slightly different depending on whether it's the test orbits here at Starbase or if you're talking about doing it right back at the Cape once launches start from 39A. So I could see it possibly being an option, but I'm not sure of the exact abort scenarios yet for Starship.
yeah, I
It
gotcha.
also
I think.
depends. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just also had that unlike the shuttle, which had OMS engines for firing in orbit, but those were not nearly as powerful as the RS-25s. You could also, in theory, conduct a sort of a plane change maneuver on your first orbit that would probably get you back to your launch site, considering you can just relight the Raptors for adjustment. I think that would physically be possible off the top of my head, which is something that the shuttle wouldn't be able to do. So you don't need giant cross-range gliding capability to get back.
Yeah, those Raptors have a lot more power than the shuttle ever would in orbit.
Right.
Yeah, what I was sort of thinking here is that also it kind of depends on the trajectory. Just thinking out loud, it's like if you go into a polar orbit, the next time you go over your launch site is way after, like it's many orbits. Whereas if you go into sort of the same kind of inclination that your launch site is located, just because of the geometry of the orbit, on the next orbit you kind of come close. It's not exactly overhead, because it shifts as the Earth rotates, but still you come close, especially if it's a low Earth orbit. So it might be doable to just let the ship maybe move a little bit here and there to point to the launch site, or maybe, as you said, with a small firing of the Raptors, you might get into the proper alignment once you are in that kind of orbit. So kind of thinking, just because of the whole orbital mechanics situation there, that depending on your orbit, again, if it's a polar orbit, you have to wait a long time, but if it's a low inclination orbit, you probably can get there in the next orbit.
Yeah, I gotcha. Thank you for that. Bringing in our next question here, which is from Amiga Clone, a name we've seen in chat before. Any update on the FAA launch authorization? No, but that's not a bad thing. Basically, and you guys, I'll throw it to you to add to this. But the way I've been answering this question is basically, unlike the environmental assessment, where they created this dashboard website where you can check on the status of individual parts of the assessment, and there was always an estimated date of completion that they were working toward. That won't exist for the launch license, which is the final bit of authorization they'll need, which they won't grant unless the final items from the environmental assessment are finished. But it also can depend on things like vehicle readiness. So literally a final pre-launch wet dress rehearsal or something, which could occur the day before the launch. Might be possible before the launch license is actually issued. And so the launch license could be issued the day of launch or the day before. It could also be issued more in advance, depends on the schedule and what exactly the FAA wants to see before they authorize it. But there's no way to check on the individual status of individual things they're looking at. There's no status check on the mitigations that they had to do after the environmental assessment. And so we're not going to really expect a whole lot of updates until basically either SpaceX announces a launch date that they're working toward, which would give us an indication that they've been told by the FAA, once you complete final tests or whatever, you'll be good to launch, or the FAA issues the launch license. If the license gets issued, that's a public record thing that we will see. But I basically don't think that no news is bad news here. We weren't not really expecting to hear much on the final launch license until very close to launch at the latest.
And this
to-
is something that is not really just for SpaceX. I believe there
Yeah.
are obviously a lot of people that are very like they are probably very impatient, and whenever there's some paperwork in the way, they kind of claim it's because they are against SpaceX or something. Now this actually happens to many companies out there. I believe we're waiting on ABL, for example, to get their launch
Mhm.
license for the RS-1 rocket. So it's like not to be confused with the Ares 1 rocket. It's another
Why'd you
rocket.
gotta go there? Why do you
Oh
gotta go there?
no. Oh no.
But yeah,
Uh,
it's not something that is just SpaceX. It's just it's government, right? It takes time. It's paperwork. So
All the red
don't-
tape.
yeah. So I could expect, like, maybe I wouldn't be surprised if we have to wait a little bit, but I wouldn't expect that to be like many months, like 3 or 4 months or something. Might be just a couple of weeks, maybe 3 or 4 weeks at most. That's sort of what we're waiting, for example, for ABL's rocket. So maybe it's what happens eventually. I think we also waited for Firefly as well and Astra to get their launch license. I even remember from Starhopper days, we waited for like a month to get the launch license for Starhopper. It was ready and all,
mhm.
but it takes time for these things to get sorted out. And at the end of the day, the sort of modified launch license that they did with the Starhopper, instead of being 200 meters, it went to 150. That kind of saved Starhopper. So sometimes this paperwork might help, believe it or not.
There you go.
Yeah, it's unfortunately a lot of times it's a waiting game, but I mean, I've seen them with Falcon launches issue the launch license a couple days before, so
Yep.
you never know.
I remember when they came back from Amos 6 failure for the Iridium 1. I remember we were waiting for like the FCC permit and the FAA launch license. It was like the last few days, and they got it 1 or 2 days before the launch. It was crazy.
Next question here from Star Watchers is asking, is there possibly going to be a full stack today? I don't think that's what we're expecting today, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure that that's gonna happen today. Unless they were on full turbo here, I don't think that will happen. Yeah. In fact, just because I just remember I was kind of thinking of talking about this. There's a Raptor engine right there. If you can see under
Oh
the
yeah.
OLM, there's a Raptor on the Raptor stand, the proper Raptor stand, by the way. The other one is like sort of like a general work platform for the OLM. But yeah, there's a Raptor there, and many people probably will be like, why is it there? Well, we believe it is because uh, Booster 7 doesn't have all 33 Raptors. It might actually have 32 of them. It might be missing one of the center engines. And the reason why is this is because when they roll it back, so before they roll it back and lift it off from the OLM, we saw them taking 2 Raptors. I believe they installed one. That like they only changed one of them, and it was still missing another one. The problem is when they roll back to the Mega Bay, you have to fit one of those engines through the stand. And the problem is, as you can see, probably in that same view, you can see there are engines in the way, right? So you got to remove the engines, all the shielding, where they are located, and roll one of these into the inner part of the engine section, because this is one of the center ones. So you have to remove the outer ones in order to get to the middle. And I guess they went just like, you know what, we're gonna install this once it comes back, because it is easier on the OLM, because you can just install it from underneath. I guess another option will be to lift the whole booster with a stand and everything out there at the Mega Bay, but they might have not considered that too safe. I believe the cranes there at the Mega Bay are only rated for 180 tons, whereas Booster 7 alone is like over 200 tons. So we did see at one point they had 2 of those cranes, the 2 cranes at the Mega Bay, just hooked up to the 2 pins on Booster 7. That was wild. But I don't think they ever lifted it from the ground. So yeah, I'm not sure that ever happened, and that kind of explains why they're doing this now. That they are gonna put a Raptor there, right on the stand at the OLM, because otherwise you will need to remove all the outer engines. Not all, but like from where you want to put the engine. So yeah, and that's not optimal, obviously.
All right, yeah, you can get the best view of that Raptor is on that left-hand side of your screen if you're looking basically through the legs of the orbital launch mount. Just kind of chilling there, waiting for its turn, but I think they're going to lift the booster onto the launch mount first, like you said. And that's where our attention is right now. But regarding back to the kind of full stack question and asking if we'd expect them to stack both vehicles today, Booster 7 got up to 7 engines on a static fire, we believe, right?
Yes.
Yep.
And so, would we expect more booster static fire testing before full stack testing?
Oh, I was
no
kind
one
of
wants to
waiting for
answer.
Sawyer.
Oh,
Okay, who goes first?
I mean, I'll let you go first, and then I'll chime in after.
Good. I'm okay with that. Yeah, ship 24 is right there. So as you can see on the left side, and so on the left cam and the right cam, ship 24 is right there next to booster 7 and next to the OLM. So if you think about it, if you fire the engines with the ship right next to it, I mean, it will probably be a good test of the tiles. Not gonna lie, but I don't think it's safe or healthy for ship 24. So in order to see another static fire on the OLM, obviously we will need to see that ship moved out from the location it is right now. I wouldn't rule that out. There's always SPMTs at hand right there. They have many of them. So if they needed to test Booster 7 before the full stack, it will kind of make sense in order to test the upgrades that they have been doing to the OLM as well, and Booster 7 before they do the full stack. But if they needed to do that, they have SPMTs laying around. It's like just move ship 24 to one side. And remember, on one of the tests that they did, the crane was there that morning, and they just moved the crane. So it's like, just move ship 24 to one side, and just do the static fires or whatever that you want to do before the stack. And it's not out of the realm of possibility. That's what I'm saying.
I guess what
right.
I'm most confused about is just why move the ship there if that's not your plan. Like, it doesn't seem like you'd put the ship there if you were like, oh, we're gonna have to move it out of the way anyway.
Yeah, it's a bit unusual, but I mean, like you were saying, it's a heck of a way to test the tiles. The question is, do you want to...
I don't think they're actually gonna do that, though.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think you'd rather do more engine testing, since again we've only done 7 out of 33, so work our way up to the 33 engine static fire, and then maybe one additional one with Starship on top, with ship 24, to see how bad the rattling does to the heat shield tiling.
Yeah.
That's the other concern, is once you stack it on top and fire up the engines before you do an orbital flight, what's it going to do to that heat shield? I know they've been working on it and attaching new tiles and trying to get them affixed even better, but it's always a risk when you've got that much power underneath it.
Yep, you're right.
The other point to add to this conversation too, and this is a question from Justin, alluding to, there's been talks about, can they do 33 engine static fire on the booster without stacking the ship on top? And is stacking the ship actually required for some of the final engine testing that they're going to do, for simply holding the vehicle down rather than relying on the launch mount exclusively? Do we have any insight into whether they have the option of a 33 engine firing without the ship on top?
Yeah, so this is a common question, and as I've said it many times, but I'm gonna talk about it again. I've always believed that they didn't need the ship on top, and there were sort of indications that they might have not needed that at all. The reason being that the OLM clamps are sort of like strengthened when they do these tests. So they basically add like turnbuckles, for example, to the OLM clamps so that they are able to stay fixed in place and also hold more force than they are usually holding during basically launch operations. So that's one of the things. And another thing, obviously, it's not secret that we hear things. We know people, right? At least I do, kind of. And I have heard many times, from sources, hey, we actually don't need the ship on top. Now, a whole different thing, obviously, as I've said many times as well, even though they don't need it, it doesn't mean they're not going to use it. So that's a whole different thing. Like, you could not need our merch, for example, but you may want our merch, right? So there you go.
There you go.
Merch plug. So that was totally unnoticed, but yeah. So it's what I usually say. That's a gorgeous picture, by the way, from Jack. So yeah, Falcon 9 sunspots. I really love that picture, by the way. He spent so much time planning that one. But yeah, it's like they may not need it, but hey, it's nice to have around, right? You kind of ensure that you don't need to figure out whether the hold downs actually work. Let's put it that way, right? Yeah, and also I will say, I will be surprised if for the first 33 engine static fire they fully load everything. Just as a note, because you will think they will probably take precautions in case of a rod, that they might not want the whole thing to be fueled just in case. At least not fueled to the brim, obviously. But we'll see. I'm definitely I'm really super pumped about this. It's like I really want a full stack, do all the things, and wet dress rehearsals and static fires. I'm seeing, I saw some people mention before, Elon said major test next is wet dress rehearsal and 33 engine static fire. It's like, yeah, major test. There might be some minor tests in between.
Sure.
I wouldn't rule out any cryo test or something of the full stack. Remember, that ship QD arm, the last time they used it was on ship 20 on March. They did a couple of cryo tests of the full stack back then, and all of that has been revamped for ship 24. They've changed the QD, for example. The whole QD went away. They changed the plumbing and things like that. So all of that has to be now put into action again. And I wouldn't be surprised if the first thing that they do is a cryo test. And then after a cryo test, they start loading propellants and things like that, with dress rehearsals, whatever, But yeah, I will expect minor tests before the major tests.
But at the same time, I don't think a 33 engine static fire is completely out of the discussion. I mean, if you go back to when Falcon Heavy was in its demo testing, they did a full 27 engine static fire, I believe, about a week or two before launch, and obviously there was a big risk of Rudd putting 27 of those Raptors on at the same time, or the Merlin, sorry.
No, I was going to say, 27 Raptors, that's an interesting Falcon Heavy configuration.
No, the Merlin would be, sorry.
We got you, though. I also want to bring in some super chats really quick because we do want to thank people who are supporting the stream. And Taylor Van Camp has done some math for us, says that if the ship payload is basically 150 tons and the average weight of a slice of bacon is half an ounce, ship could theoretically hold 600,000 pieces of bacon. # Jack. So thank you, Taylor, for the bacon math. Also, Blind Boy says # bacon lift. So I think that the chat's thinking about bacon right now, and we respect that, and I'm sure Jack will appreciate that as well. But thank you for the support. There's got to be some people watching who are new to the channel and don't get the bacon reference, and they're just very confused right now. Don't worry, if you hang out long enough, you'll hear Jack rant about bacon.
Even in the new video, he's making bacon.
Yeah, I was just about to say, they're probably sort of thinking of that video that we released this morning. If you like coverage of Starbase, you should watch it. By the way, some updates there.
Other questions here from Zombie saying, is the booster pressurized for rigidity during the lift? It is not uncommon to pressurize space vehicles and boosters and things like that when they're being transported one way or the other. Do we know if the boosters are even slightly pressurized?
I think
Well,
that's
we
a
know
question
that.
more for you, Alex. Yeah.
Yeah, we know they are not hooked up because we can see there are no dangling,
Right, yeah.
lines or anything when they lift the boosters. So it's probably likely that they pressurize the booster prior to the lift and they disconnect things. We see them even disconnecting like a plate that they have on the QD to protect it during transportation. And so that is part of the process. Now, whether that pressurization lasts until they connect the booster QD, that's a whole thing that I'm not really sure about. I haven't really thought about it too much, to be honest. But yeah, it's probably likely that they leave some pressure on the tanks for the whole operation, just because it's probably safer that way and takes the loads better.
Yeah, I gotcha. Thank you for the question there, Zombie. The next question comes from Stephen Lewis saying, will they hop and catch Booster 7 before an orbital test flight? Would that count as a major test?
I would bet that would count as a major test. I don't know if that's the major test that Elon was talking about, though.
I
But
don't think so.
I mean, that would be quite a sight.
It would, but I remember, I think the big thing to remember is that getting to orbit is a much higher priority than proving the catch system. The catch can come after, because they're going to still be upgrading the booster on booster design. They're going to be learning from the first orbital test flight and maybe make some design changes there. And so it's not really required to prove out the whole catch system just yet. And of course, every catch attempt is a risk to the launch site until that system is proven. So I don't think they're going to do. We haven't heard anything about a hop test, and it doesn't sound like, based on the last word, where they're getting ready for full stack testing before launch, doesn't sound like there's going to be any plans for a hop of Booster 7 before the orbital test flight. I think the first catch attempt will be an experimental attempt after it has lofted Starship towards orbital velocity.
Right, and as Elon has talked about before, the goal is to be able to produce a new booster every 1 to 2 months at that rate. So, at that point, it's get the launch cadence up, get, the ships proven, and then the focus can shift more towards the quick and rapid turnaround and reuse.
Another question here from Chris Watt, who says, do we know where that Raptor is from out of Booster 7? I believe we know it's a Raptor center engine, right, Alex?
Yeah, it's part of the center cluster of 13. I believe I saw one of the engine layout things that some fans keep around, but I don't remember actually what exactly the engine was. I think it is probably from the center cluster of 3 engines. Maybe we'll see it when they lift it, because we sometimes see the engines. So when we see a Raptor missing, we saw a Raptor missing actually when they lifted the last time, and I think it was a center engine. So, like a center engine meaning the cluster of 3. So maybe when they lift it, we'll see it. So stay tuned. We might see
Getting
it.
some
Sure.
robotic camera work right now to help us with the discussion. I wonder if we can make out that serial number. I think that's maybe a
28?
9. Is it 28 or is it 29? I think it is an 8. I think you're right.
I think it's an 8, yeah.
Our Raptor all wrapped up and just waiting for a booster to be attached to.
Yeah, it's an 8.
Enhance. This is crazy. But yeah, there's your Raptor engine just hanging out. But yeah, Raptor center engine. Don't think we know super more specifically than that. Here is a question, Sawyer. I'm going to throw this one to you. If they plan to begin with expendable starships, is there any point in the 3 non-vacuum engines on the Starship?
I mean, I don't see why you wouldn't at this point. Again, as we've talked about, this is more of a testing type moment here of getting everything up and running and functional. And while, yes, they'll probably be expendable to start, and there's always the possibility of trying to do that slow burn and splashdown in the ocean, honestly, so that you can at least retrieve it and learn some data from it. So I don't see why you wouldn't just get everything up and testing.
The other part to add to that as well is those sea level Raptors are the ones that offer gimbal authority, and so that actually offers your steering during the main like boost portions of flight. And so it's not just about which ones operate most efficiently. And in fact, sea level engines still operate even more efficiently at vacuum. They're just not optimized for that, and they're not as efficient as the vacuum engines. But those sea level engines still offer gimbal authority, and I think that's going to be needed even on expendable missions. So yeah, I think I'll concur with you, Sawyer, that I believe they will always have those sea level engines on board, even if the ship is not landing eventually. Got a super chat question here from Greg, who asked, did Booster 7 get the RUD containment hardware, and how does it work? I believe that's talking about some of those, what looked like blast shields that SpaceX was testing out of McGregor. We did a video on that. Don't think we've seen that at Starbase yet, though, right?
I don't think so. But, you know, what we've seen so far, at least on the outside, on the outer engines, it kind of looks like tinfoil, to be honest. Yeah, it's obviously it's thermal blankets, you know, whatever the technical term and everything. But we haven't really seen the center engines. I believe probably the can things, like the shields that look like cans, that might be related with the center engines, maybe. So we will have to wait for the lift to happen, because with all the outer engines in the way, you cannot really see the center engines that well while the booster is on the stand.
Mm-hmm.
But when it is being lifted, though,
right, which
we
will
might see more
hopefully be
things.
soon.
Yeah, we hope so.
Hopefully when they lift, we don't see anything that prompts more questions than it does answers.
Oh
but-
no, this is a SpaceX. You know, that's gonna happen. There's gonna be more questions. Yeah.
And it seems like those, you know, once they do put that on, from my understanding, is that protection is to help the event of a single engine RUD, that it doesn't go impacting and possibly damaging any of the other engines around it. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, they did something similar on the Falcon boosters. Like the octaweb structure is designed to basically say if a Merlin explodes, which has happened before, it doesn't damage any of the other engines and the vehicle can keep going. Same concept with Starship and Super Heavy, or at least Super Heavy. I would imagine Starship also has engine out capability, maybe depending on when in flight, but the booster definitely can survive, you know, losing one, maybe two, maybe even more Raptors on the way up and still finish its mission. That's part of its reliability. Let's see. First of all, we had a message in chat saying that they'll launch a ship full of bacon when pigs fly, which is a terrible joke. You're bad and you should feel bad, Sean. But I appreciate the chat message because it gave me something to say on stream, and we appreciate you tuning in despite the terrible joke. Jurassic Orange does have a question for us, and this is moseying into the wild speculation part of our stream because they haven't lifted yet, so here we go. But I get to throw Alex and Sawyer under the bus and let them answer first, so this is great.
Oh boy.
Jurassic Orange is asking, when do we predict the orbital launch of Starship? So let's update our orbital flight estimates now that Booster 7 is returning to the launch mount. And Sawyer, it's your first Starbase stream, so you get to go first. What's your time? I'm so sorry. Not really. What's your time frame for Starship orbital launch? What are you thinking?
If I had to guess, and again, as we mentioned, these are all predictions, nothing official on it yet. I think once we see that static fire either close to or at 33 engines, I think at that point we would be less than a month away. So I think it's very possible that we will see this before the end of the year. That's my bet on it currently. However, if something were to happen during testing, or one of the static fires had a problem as the engine amount went up, then I could see that getting pushed maybe till first quarter of next year.
All right, Alex, your turn.
Oh boy. I had someone ask me this the other day, and he was like, give me chances at least. So I'm gonna give chances. I'm gonna say there's 0 chances, at least in my opinion, or of any sort of launch, obviously this month and next month. But maybe there are small chances that they may be able to do it on December. Again, I'm not really positive about that. I see there's more chances going into 2023. January, February, that kind of time frame might be already well above the 50% chance kind of thing. That I will probably give to it. Mainly because of all the things that they have to do that they haven't done before. That is really, really complicated, and it may take many aborts and many things. We see one of the cranes on the right view. There's a crane, a yellow crane next to the tank farm. That crane, along with many others, has been replacing pumps at the methane site for weeks and months. So they still haven't got yet like a good way of having a ground support system for the whole thing that is basically fueling the rocket. So we're probably going to be seeing them starting doing wet dress rehearsals and then having to change more stuff on that orbital tank farm. There's a total possibility that we may not see a full engine static fire, for example, until next month. And that's a real possibility. And once they do that, they may have to upgrade more things. So that's why I'm giving no chances of any launch next month. Even though I know, again, I know people at the company that they're telling me, "Hey, we're trying really really hard to get it," and I'm like, "Yeah, but this is rocket science, obviously, right? This is not easy." So I understand that they're trying their hardest, but yeah, I'm not really positive they're gonna be hitting next month. Now, December, there might be some chances if everything goes their way, they might be able to. But I'm more positive into next year, January, February timeframe, possibly. So that's sort of my bet, my prediction. Current prediction. Ask me in
Yes.
2 months and it'll be different.
It's not brain surgery, right? It's just rocket science.
Yeah, it's not rocket
Yeah.
surgery. Yeah, I think those are all kind of
I got that reference, by the
No,
way.
thank you. Not a unreasonable time frame towards the end of the year. That's kind of what SpaceX has also been trying to hit. Like Elon tweets have been trying to say that by the end of the year they'll still be able to launch. I think that's still a little optimistic, and I'm going to hold to my prediction that it will launch on the Falcon Heavy anniversary on February 6th. And I'm sticking to it
Oh.
because I haven't been proven wrong yet. So that's
That would
what
be
I'm
so
going
nice.
with. Wouldn't
And
that?
now
I feel like it would work, you know?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I do have to just say though that there are some speculations about whether Starship could be the first Methalox rocket to fly, but there may be a video on NASASpaceflight about that of the timeline remaining
Maybe.
on Starship
Oh.
and if it could beat some of the other Methalox rockets.
I wonder if there are moderators in chat that could like link that video in chat because we did do a video about the different Methalox rockets, of which Starship is one, and but I don't think Starship is the front runner to win that race. I think you will have to watch the video to find out which one is. But yeah, definitely a cool video. Definitely check it out.
I think I'm a moderator on the chat, so I guess I could link it.
I am too, but I got the question panel up. I've only got so much screen real estate here. Maybe oh god, I need to find more monitors. That's terrible.
I have 1,000 tabs open just for everything that we do.
I've got an article from Sawyer in another tab that I'm not editing because I'm on the stream right now. But like, it's a busy time. It's a busy time.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, also some people just mentioning in chat that Space Coast Live has got some action right now. For those who want to keep tabs on some of the other spaceflight happenings, Blue Origin appears to be delivering some new Glen fairings. They're just in giant containers. You can't see the fairing, unfortunately. But big fairing transport containers have been delivered to the Kennedy Space Center. And so that's happening on Space Coast Live. If you got another monitor to check up on the Space Coast, definitely recommend one of my new favorite streams here on NASA Spaceflight. But for now, we're also going to keep you updated on Booster 7, which is at the exact same place that it was when we started the stream. But they could literally lift any moment now. All of the indicators are that they're pretty much ready for the lift. And so we're just keeping an eye out until they can get started here, and hopefully it won't be too long. Taking some questions in the meantime, and so I'll jump right in with Shane's next question, which is, are they going to try to catch Booster 7? I think this question is talking about the test flight. Because you don't need to catch it when it's sitting on a transport stand. As far as the first flight, I believe the latest that we heard was basically that there is a possibility that the booster will try to be caught on the first flight. And what will decide that is the booster itself basically doing its own health checks during the entire flight. Let's say that the booster lifts off with the ship on top, gets all the way to stage separation, and all systems are nominal at that point. The booster will, of course, separate from the ship. It'll have some fuel that is full of fuel and oxidizer, methane and oxygen, left over that it will have reserved for a boost back burn and a landing burn. Of course, there's no entry burn on the Super Heavy. That's a difference from the Falcon 9 family, where the booster is built to withstand a passive re-entry, basically. So it'll have that fuel left. It'll, after stage separation, Starship will obviously make its way toward orbit, and the booster will flip around and conduct a boost back burn, probably using less than all 33 engines. I don't know if what the latest on how many engines are for each burn. Might need an update on that, but some subset of the engines will be used to fire the booster, basically remove all of its horizontal velocity and start bringing it back towards the launch site. During that burn, the booster will also be testing its health and making sure that all the systems are working properly. Once that burn is complete, if that shutdown is nominal, then the booster will be on a trajectory to splash down just off the coast of the launch site. And as the booster returns to the launch site, it'll continue to be checking itself, checking that the Griffin systems are working, that the Raptor systems are working, that its navigation systems are working. And if it detects that anything is wrong at any point in the sequence, it has the option to abort to splash down off the coast. And it probably depends on what exactly isn't working, whether it tries like a soft splashdown. We saw a Falcon 9 do this before, where it still lit the engine for like a soft splashdown, but it was off the coast of landing zone 1 and didn't try to steer towards the landing zone because the Griffin system had failed, and so it couldn't reliably steer itself. Similar situation, if a similar failure mode happens on the booster, it could still attempt a soft splashdown because that gets you more data on the landing burn anyway. But if all the systems are working well, it will basically aerodynamically be steering itself towards the launch mount. It'll fire up that landing burn, and again, if that landing burn starts poorly, it should still have an abort option to get itself as far away from the launch site as possible, so it won't damage any infrastructure. But if the landing burn starts nominally, the booster will probably try to be caught because all the systems are working. And think of it this way: it would be silly to get to that point where all the systems were working perfectly and you didn't try to catch it, because then your next flight is just going to have to repeat everything that this one did to get to a catch attempt. So if all systems are working, why not give it a try? You're not going to get any data by aborting at that point. So that is what I believe the latest we heard is that basically if everything works perfectly up until that point, they might as well try a catch attempt.
And fun fact, that's exactly what Falcon 9 still does to this day
Right,
for
on every
drone
flight.
ship landings. Yeah, if you notice, if you ever watch the landing of the booster from the onboard camera, it kind of looks like it's about to go into the water, and that's because it is targeting the water until it gets within range and does that kind of health check, and as long as everything's good, it does that kind of last-minute steering turn to get it onto the actual drone ship.
Yeah. So think that's what we're expecting right now. What I'm hoping is that for the first orbital test flight, SpaceX provides some more official info, like they do on all the Falcon launches, where they have a mission timeline and like a quick synopsis of the goals and things like that. Falcon 9 or SpaceX always says we're making a recovery attempt on this drone ship or at this landing zone. Of course, that's usually pretty obvious because we can track the drone ships and things like that. But hopefully we get a nice bit of official info once the Starship orbital test flight is near. Keeping some questions coming for now while we await the lift to get underway. We got one from Benjamin who says, what is our opinion on the HLS, especially now that we've seen a thruster at McGregor, or less what we think so. So this is also a very interesting video. Just came out on the NASA Spaceflight channel that some weird thruster appeared and was tested at McGregor that doesn't sound like anything we've seen tested before. It didn't look like a Super Draco, didn't look like a Raptor of any kind. So we're wondering if we may have caught a glimpse of the first HLS thruster. I don't think we've confirmed that, but I think it's what our best guess is. And if that is the case, I think that gets us a bit of confidence that that HLS development is continuing well. And so that is something really interesting, and I'm very excited to hopefully see more of that and maybe get some updates as that device gets tested. Sawyer, what are you thinking about the human landing system and how SpaceX will get to testing that variant?
I mean, I think it's exciting that we're finally getting to that point. It's been the discussion now that, it's been selected for the first lunar landing in probably about 40, 50 years here.
Mm-hmm.
Finally seeing these engines tested is really nice to see that progress. And I know there's, already work underway at the Cape, getting everything crew rated there, even possibly crew rating pad 40 for future use. But yeah, we're getting close to it. And I think once we start seeing Starship fly more regularly over the next couple months to a year or two, I think then that's when we're really going to see the HLS development kick into high gear.
Alex, any thoughts to add to the HLS development discussion?
Yeah, I believe there were people kind of wondering why we're posing that possibility that there was a thruster for HLS, and one of the things is that location doesn't have any sort of Raptor plumbing, so you don't have any way to actually install any Raptor in that bay. It's actually a bay that has been rarely used in many years. We thought it would have been converted by now into like a third Raptor bay or something, but they have built the vertical ones. They modify the tripod stand and all of that, and it didn't happen. So obviously, it's probably not going to happen at any point unless they are really desperate. It does seems like it is being used for some kind of Methalox thruster kind of thing, because it's plugged into Methalox lines. The output is obviously you can see the difference is very different from a Raptor. It kind of sounds similar, but all rocket engines at the end of the day are very noisy. It's just less noisy, right? It's that kind of thing.
It sounds different.
Yeah. So when you stop to think about it, there's not a lot of options as to what it is, and so that's why we were like, maybe that's potentially for the HLS thrusters, because if you think about it, they are Methalox thrusters. They are tiny. They are not obviously like Raptor engines. So yeah, we know Elon also will like to get rid of those on the HLS design, but it may be the case that it's still in the design and they have to go forward with that development. It's sort of like when they were doing propulsive landing for Dragon, for Crew Dragon, they were doing hover tests with Dragon, and they were doing that for at least a couple of years until they dropped it. They were like, okay, we don't need this. It's not needed. We are not gonna do this, and we're not gonna go forward with the testing. And so they stopped testing it, just as they were like, no, we're not gonna do this. So chances are that we might eventually just see them get rid of this, but as for now, it's still a potential thing.
All right, gotcha. Before we're going to keep the questions coming and tag us at NASASpaceflight with questions, and we'll keep those coming. Also, just want to give a status update for those who may just be joining us. We're here for Booster 7 to be lifted and installed onto the orbital launch mount. The chopsticks are attached. It looks like the transport stand is ready to support a lift, and they've cleared the area. There was a pad clear announcement at the orbital launch site, so all indications are that they are close to a lift here. And so we want to see that Booster 7 with all but one of its Raptor engines, we think, get lifted onto the orbital launch mount for what could be the final time. I don't believe we're expecting a full stack today. Ship 24 is nearby, but I think we're currently expecting that lift to happen later, perhaps another day. Not super clear whether the ship will be stacked before any more booster testing yet. But either way, the booster should be lifted today, and that's what we're waiting on, and we'll shout out as soon as we see that lift get underway. But we're taking some questions in the meantime. So here is a question from Michael saying that, being that 8 didn't test before 7, talking about Booster 8 and Booster 7, do you think that they will go straight to Booster 9? Basically, have there been any indicators, because Booster 8's sitting out at the launch site for potential testing, Have there been any indicators that Booster 8 will not get tested and that maybe Booster 9 gets to be next after 7?
I mean,
Well,
from what I've seen personally, and then Alex, I'll toss it over to you. It
Mhm.
seems like all of the changes that they've been making to the vehicles have really been focused more on 9. They've done a lot of retrofitting as they find out more things with 7 and have upgraded that. But my understanding is they're really focusing now on the production of 9, which is currently being assembled, and building in all of these changes that they've found right into the new concept. So my thought would be is they do something like they did with the SN 10, 11, jumping right to 15 kind of deal of everything that they've learned and all the improvements going right into 9. And if everything works, kind of using 9 as a new template going forward for future ship builds.
Yeah. So the whole deal with that is it's really complicated to guess whether a vehicle is gonna be dropped or skipped or things like that. You will think that they probably wouldn't have moved Booster 8 if they have been like, yeah, no, we're not gonna fly this one, or at least we're not gonna test it at all. If they were, skipping it, they actually moved it to the orbital launch site. Now the only difference is obviously we haven't seen it any frosty or anything like we haven't seen any testing basically. So there are multiple reasons why this might be the case. Again, it's a hard thing to actually guess. But summarizing, Booster 8 could have gone to the OLM, but it may have not needed that. It could have been tested on the same pad, on the same stand that it is located right now. It is probably also the case that it might eventually be tested on the structural test stand. The only problem is the structural test stand is not there at the launch site. So and it wouldn't be surprising if we see that going eventually to the Massey test site that they have now for cryogenic testing. So all in all, what I'm trying to say is that we don't really know what's going to happen with Booster 8 because everything points toward either side of the thing. Like they may scrap it because they haven't tested yet, but hey, they moved it to the launch site, so maybe it's not a scrap entirely. What's the deal with that, right? So it's right now sort of in a limbo right now where might be flying, might be not. I guess we'll see. We'll see if it doesn't do any testing and they fully stack Booster 9 and prepare it with the chines and everything, that might be an indication that they are skipping it. In which case, maybe Ship 25 will lift off on top of Booster 9. So that's going to shift a little bit of the pairings here going forward. Speaking of Booster 9 being stacked, by the way, I believe it is already hooked to one of the cranes on the Mega Bay. So a stacking of Booster 9 might happen today. The methane tank will be stacked on the liquid oxygen tank, and that might be one thing that might happen today. But that doesn't mean it's complete. Obviously, it may need many other systems to get installed, and pressure lines, and all the things. But yeah, it's hard to gauge this. It's not really easy. But that's why we're tank watchers, I guess.
Yeah, we got another question kind of similar vein when we're talking about, future vehicles and what their fates may be. Mr. Emo is asking about after the first orbital flight, like how often would we see Starship launch? I mean, eventually there's long-term goals of it launching, multiple times a day or whatever. But to the spirit of Booster 9's flight, let's hypothetically, whether it's Booster 8 or Booster 9 that flies next, how quickly after the first orbital flight would we see the that next vehicle lift off as they move from first flight launch cadence, which obviously it takes so long to prepare for our first flight, as they get into the first couple flights and then start ramping up into a launch cadence that can support missions. How quickly would you expect that ramp up to occur?
Well, they're hoping that to happen really quickly. I believe they were kind of targeting the second orbital launch to happen within 30 days of the first one. I'm not sure that's gonna happen, but it's a neat goal to have, right? Because it kind of drives the schedule into forcing these vehicles to be ready by within a month of the first launch, and so that's a goal, obviously, and it might not be met. But if they didn't have this goal, I don't think they will probably have any chance at all at getting anything done within a month. So it's always good to have, as I said before, we know they're targeting next month for the orbital launch. I don't think it's gonna happen next month, but it's good to have those hard goals, because otherwise you wouldn't get there at all, or you will get there way later. Sort of like sleeping on the laurels or something like that.
And just kind of in a comparison type of standpoint here, we've been flying the Block 5 Falcon 9 for, I believe, about 5 years now. And we've
Hey,
gotten it to a
really
point where...
quick, sorry, I just want to interrupt very quickly. I'll come right back to you. There was a drone flying in this view. We caught it for just a brief second, but it appears there is a drone out by the launch site. I would imagine for something like a stack, that's purely for video purposes. It's not like they're inspecting a thermal test or anything like that. You can see it flying between the launch mount there. But anyway, wanted to address that really quick. Go ahead, sorry.
No, it's fine. What I was saying is, in kind of, if we compare it to the evolution of Falcon 9 Block 5, I believe that's been flying now in that configuration for about 5 years. And we went from one every month or so, every 2 months from each pad, to now you've got turnaround of the launch pad of 2 weeks or less. I think we can kind of go along that same type of timeline if I were a betting man, in that it's obviously going to take time. You learn, but as we get that process much more refined and more well-oiled, I guess, kind of into a well-oiled machine, I don't think it's impossible to, in the next few years, see it get to a point where you have multiple launches a month.
It's going up. It's going up. We have lift.
And we have liftoff.
Right.
Kind of, sort of.
There we
Crane
go.
assisted takeoff, or chopsticks assisted takeoff? I guess that's the word.
Okay.
But there you
That's
go, you can
lifted
see the
off
booster.
ground.
I mean, it has. So, Booster 7
Yep.
being lifted off of its transport stand, and they are moving it up to be installed on the orbital launch mount. There we go.
And this time it only happened an hour into the stream. Not
Yeah,
too
we
long.
did better this time. That's good. Maybe that drone is the indicator. We gotta be looking out for the drone next time. That's
Yeah.
probably not a very firm indicator. We probably shouldn't rely on that.
No.
But anyway. So yeah, this is
So-
Booster 7. Should get a good view of a bunch of Raptors here shortly.
So right now they're lifting Booster 7 off the stand with the help of those pins. Now we can see them, thankfully, because they are out of the berm there. And this might take a few minutes to get kind of right. It might already be right now out of the stand. Obviously we don't have a view because of that darn stand. Not stand. Jeez, what it is? The berm for the static fires. They have a berm there, and it's obscuring the view. But yeah, we have a lift finally, and now the next thing that we should see is the stabilizer pins, the triangle things on the arms. They are going to go all the way in now. They are going to be deployed, and they're going to be basically engaging on two sockets on the sides of the booster at the height of the methane tank. We're seeing still more lift, so it's still not stopped. But once it stops, that's kind of the thing that we're expecting here. And once those stabilizer pins are engaged, then these pins here on the transport stand will disconnect.
Mm-hmm.
We're already seeing that tinfoil.
I don't know if it's actually tinfoil. Maybe we should call it something else.
Yeah, I know it's not tinfoil, but it's just too easy to call it that.
It's aerospace foil. There's a difference.
Yeah.
There
okay.
you go.
I'm still gonna call the Raptors fiery kebabs. So
Okay. Fair.
you can keep me from that.
Well, they'll get definitely a good view of those Raptor engines once it lifts high enough. But again, they got to disengage from the transport stand and stuff like that. But we are underway. Another question regarding Booster 7 that we've got in chat here is if in theory, they catch 7 on that first flight. Do you think that the 30-day later second flight could be a reuse? Could Booster 7 fly for a second time?
Oh, not sure that they're ready for releasing this soon into the program.
I agree. I don't see this being a reuse. And again, the fact that this is kind of more of a test vehicle, I think they would want to just get the data and then make the improvements to future vehicles and refly those.
I
Yeah,
think I agree
totally
with you
agree.
there. Also, I mean, it would be impossible to make that decision now anyway. You need to get the data. You need to see how the booster performs. You need to inspect it when it comes back to be even determine whether it would be flight worthy again. But given that they are already working on upgrades for future vehicles and things like that, probably not immediate reuse candidate. Definitely a good question though.
It's so shiny with the with the
Yeah,
tip of-
the engine protection they've got on there is very much shinier than the rest of the booster.
Yeah, it seems like they stopped there. So now the next thing will probably be that engagement of the stabilizer pins. Might happen in the next few minutes. I can actually go back and I wrote down the whole process from the last lift, and
Did you put it in a spreadsheet?
yep. So
There you go.
it
Adrian would
happened.
approve.
It's actually not. It's just a lift, at least. It's not really a spreadsheet, but the stabilizers started to engage 13 minutes after the first motion occurred. So maybe anytime soon. Just a few minutes. It's not gonna be like hours again, or so we hope.
Yeah, don't say that. They'll hear you. But yeah, when
Yeah,
you
I guess
talk about
no, it's jinxed.
when you talk about those pins, can you point out exactly what you're looking at and like what we're
Sure.
expecting to see?
Yeah, I guess not everyone obviously knows everything, so it's kind of hard, or you might not know about this exact part of the process. So you can see there the arms holding the booster, and you can see a triangle thing right underneath one of the chopstick arms. And you can see it also on the right view as well. And these are the stabilizer pins, and so what these do is they stabilize the booster as they are moved when they are not on the stand. So this basically allows the booster to be placed into the correct position and be sort of like a slight positioning movements with chopsticks. So that allows them to be able to finely tune the location of the booster, and there you go, that it is. And so those things, first of all,
Oh,
they go.
all right. I went to mute and I think I unmuted to
Yeah.
cough. So that's on me.
Yeah.
My apologies.
Yeah. So these things, they go inwards first, and now what we should be looking for is the tip there. Those things have to be deployed and going all the way in, as Michael is pointing out there. You can see some kind of socket there on the booster side. That's where the pins go and kind of engage into, and that's where they are. Yeah, they are hooked up. It's not really a hook, but you know what I mean.
Right, and so you say you expect that to happen before the stabilizers on the transport stand disconnect, right?
Yeah.
Gotcha. You can see on that right-hand view right now, there's like the big posts that are sticking up from the transport stand and holding onto the booster. Those are the stabilizers on the transport stand. And so basically just helping keep the booster stable during the whole lift process. Now here's my question. Why wouldn't the chopstick stabilizers just be able to engage right away and you wouldn't need stabilizers on the transport stand?
That's a good question. So the reason for those pins on the transport stand is because they are closer to the end bottom of the booster, and what that allows is the bottom end of the booster doesn't sway as much. So the stabilizers do some help on that, but it's not complete help. It's basically not all the way. we might see later also on the OLM, there are also pins on the OLM. Those do not go up, but they are more like they swivel. It's a little bit more complicated than just moving up. So basically, those allow them to be able to move in and out the booster with the engines as they lift the booster without hitting the transport stand. So that's sort of the whole deal. And because it is close to the bottom, it has more momentum, more it's the momentum arm or whatever. It's been a long time since I've been dealing with these concepts, so forgive me for this. But yeah, it's a better lever arm there on the bottom, so you are able to do more with just less force, just because of that. And it allows them to be able to lift the whole thing without hitting the engines, which is what you will want, to not hit the engines.
It all comes down to physics.
Yep.
All right. I'm also got some questions here regarding the ship, because a lot of people are asking what this lift is the beginning of. Is this the beginning of more booster testing? Is it the beginning of a full stack with the ship on top? And of course, everyone is rightfully pointing out that the ship is right there. They didn't keep the ship away that would kind of give us a hint like, oh yeah, we're going to test the booster some more before the ship gets stacked. Surely the ship is too close to the orbital launch mount to do any significant booster testing while it just sits there. And we've kind of been touching on this before about we agree, and so it's a question of, is ship going to get moved? If so, why'd they move it there in the first place? Or maybe it is possible that they want to just integrate and move forward with testing as a full stack for whatever reason. There is also a question about some of the lift points, and Anon has a super chat question for us. Could ship 24 be stacked before the lift points on the nose cone are removed? Because that's not the lift points that the chopsticks would use, but the points where the other crane attached to help lift it on and off of the suborbital stand for its testing over there. Do those lift points need to be removed before the ship can get all the way on top of the booster, where those probably become inaccessible? Like, would that make sense?
I feel like that would make a lot of sense. I mean, a lot of that was also kind of holding it in place at one point. I know while they were working on some of the inside stuff, just keeping it off the ground. So once it's stacked, I don't really see the need for that. I think it would make more sense to remove them if you're at least going for an orbital test. Otherwise, if you plan to destack it and do more work, involving lifting it again, I could see why they would keep it there temporarily.
That's fair. However, if the current plan is you don't need the lift points anymore, like, let's say, like, yes, in theory they could destack the vehicle and re-add the lift points if they need to do more work. But if the current plan is for, to get lifted by the chopsticks onto the booster and that's that, I don't think you can remove those points if it's already stacked. So you'd have to destack the vehicle to remove them later. So maybe it makes sense to remove them now and preserve the option of adding them back if you really need to.
I think that's the path that they would take at this point, if that is the plan. Again, just let the chopsticks do most of the lifting work for you and get rid of the attachment points at the top.
It could also be the case, and I should kind of warn of this, we might see them doing full stack with the lifting points on top, because they might not go for just one full stack. So there's entire possibility here that they do not remove those, they stack ship 24, they do testing, and then they destack again to work on ship 24 even more before actually going for the launch, for the full stack for launch. So, we shouldn't be thinking, oh yeah, they're gonna lift the ship and that's gonna be for final. That's gonna be just the end of all, and the next thing they're gonna do is launch. So that should be a possibility also. And one of the things, so we were asked before whether they were gonna do a full stack today. I don't think so. And again, one of the reasons was they're probably gonna be busy installing that engine on Booster 7, but also because they have to move ship 24 to the location where roughly Booster 7 is right now, just with the chopsticks lower down, and and then there are pins on the. There are more pins. This is all pins.
It
This is
pins all the way
pins.
down.
Yeah, all the way down. So there are a set of pins on the rails of the chopsticks that deploy to be able to go into the sockets that are underneath the forward flaps on the ships. So those are basically what help in lifting the ship. So on the booster has the pins, and then they go into the rails, whereas on the ship it's actually the other way around, where the rails have pins and the ship has sockets where the pins going in. So it's a whole thing, right? So we will need to see those out and things like that. We will have to see Ship 24 move to the chopsticks. We will need to see a series of actions that they might be a little bit busy right now with other matters for today to be able to see that. Namely, that Raptor engine.
Alright. We're definitely going to keep an eye on that, obviously, to see what exactly that ship is doing right there. But Booster 7 has to be lifted first, and again, so they've lifted it off of the transport stand. It's now stopped, basically. And the transport stand has its stabilizer arms still attached to the bottom of the booster. What we're going to wait for is those smaller arms on the bottom of the chopsticks to move in and attach themselves to the booster. Do they actually attach to something, or do they just kind of rest on the side of the booster and hold it that way?
There seems to be like a socket. It might be like the pins on the bottom where they just go into like a hole and they kind of get forced into it.
Gotcha.
Yep.
So we're waiting on that to keep the booster stable so that they can release it fully from the transport stand and finish the rest of the lift. And again, that should happen like any minute now.
By the way, I now want a pin that says "This is all pins."
Next question here. We got a question about some future ships. So obviously Ship 24 is the current assignment of being the first one to go to orbit. Any thoughts? And MK is asking about Ship 26 specifically. I'll just expand this to say future ships. Are there any future ships that we see being test vehicles for either a propellant depot or a different variant of Starship designed to carry payloads or a tanker, anything like that? Have we seen any signs that any of the future ships have assignments like that?
It's hard to tell, because for that they will also need to have other kind of hardware on it. But yeah, it's hard to tell. Ship 26 doesn't even have a door or a pest dispenser, for example. So it's just a tank with a nose cone. It's a set of tanks with engines and nose cone, right? So, I mean, you could probably use that as fuel management in orbit. That could probably be a good reason to have that ship. And it obviously gets you data. It's always data. As Jack will say, and I'm sorry for stealing his phrase, but more data, more better. And you know, flying just for the sake of flying sometimes gives you data. Believe it or not, right? It's like, this is a very young system, let's put it that way, not matured system, and so they need as much data as they can. And if they fly another orbital flight, they have 33 engines on whatever booster they use, and they're gonna have 6 engines on whatever ship they use. In this case, Ship 26. So it's gonna have 6 engines that they're going to be able to test. They're going to be able to go to orbit, guidance systems, avionics, whatever. You can think many things that you will test and prove just with a set of tanks and engines and a nose cone on top. Even though it doesn't have the whole, payload bay door and pest dispenser, whatever, you still can test many things. And once you're in orbit, because it's just a tank, you can probably just, leave it up there for a bit, just to see how the cryogenic methane and the cryogenic oxygen behave in orbit and all of that. We've seen that on Falcon 9, where they have left a stage 2 in orbit even after the primary mission had ended. I think one of the latest missions that we saw that was CRS-18, where they left the second stage in orbit for 6 hours. The primary mission was like just orbital insertion with Dragon on top, that was 9 minutes into flight, and then as soon Dragon separated, they left that stage for 6 hours in orbit just to test endurance in orbit, kind of propellant systems and things like that. So yeah, the whole thing can just be used for that kind of testing, for propellant testing. Yeah.
Right, and I
Alright.
think a lot of these early ships are going to be along that kind of testing line. Once we start seeing more of them built with those payload bay doors and with the PES dispensers, I think that's more the shift of when it goes toward the commercial side or the payload side, rather than testing out how well the vehicle can function in different configurations and different situations. For example, like you mentioned, just in orbit as a how the propellant works, how the vehicle works, just kind of orbiting there for a bit.
Yeah. I am very excited when we get to see some of the other Starship variants and the more operational variants start to get tested. Not just the human landing system, but things that will deploy larger satellites, not just the Starlink versions, the tankers, the propellant depot, because all of those things give us a better glimpse as to what those operational missions are going to look like. Obviously, none of that happens without the prototype vehicles you see here right now. But yeah, that's it's something worth looking forward to for me personally, at least, because that's, I think, even more exciting when you start to see vehicles being tested that can carry out the missions that this vehicle is going to be tasked with for the next however many years. Let's see. I'm going to keep some more questions coming here. This is a bit of a tongue-in-cheek question. JavaMan's asking, how long can Booster 7 stay on the pad before it has to be rolled back, destacked, and the batteries changed? I think
Ooh,
this
that's
is referring
harsh.
to a different rocket, but it is worth mentioning that the booster doesn't actually have that problem, right, Sawyer?
Exactly, yeah. This booster, as mentioned, uses liquid oxygen and methane, whereas our big orange rocket that we're discussing here for SLS and Artemis uses liquid oxygen and hydrogen. That liquid hydrogen has been quite finicky, and part of the reason why Artemis is not launched yet. So yes, the Methalox setup that we have for Booster 7 hopefully will prevent that from being an issue.
Yeah, there we go. Appreciate the question, Java Man.
Yes.
Even if you were poking some fun at some things. Do have a couple of super chats that have also come in here. Jirwa, thank you for gifting 5 Red Team memberships. It's a very generous amount of support, so we appreciate that. A question here from William. After SpaceX successfully launches 7 and 24 together, will Starbase be a full production? Well, when will Starship be fully production ready, like Tesla factories, pumping out boosters and rockets? Sawyer, what do you think? Is Starbase going to ramp up production right away, or do they have some stuff to learn first?
I mean, obviously there are things that they're going to learn, but the fact that they're already working on 9 and starting to, it seems like, add upgrades to it, I think they're really going to start picking it up. And again, the early plan is to build everything now at Starbase and then send it by barge over to the Cape once they start launching from there, while the Roberts Road facility continues to be worked on. So, I mean, I think that we're going too soon.
Yeah, and you have to keep in mind that also they've got the new factory they're building in Florida, which, shameless plug, if you haven't seen the latest flyover video from Cape Canaveral, you should definitely check it out, because that is the best way to keep track on building out the Star Factory. Is it Star Factory? Is that a made-up name, or is that a real name? Also, we got another drone sighting.
Oh, yeah. I've been kind of hearing it referred to it as such. I don't know if that's the official name, kind of like how Boca Chica quickly turned into Starbase. So
Yeah, but Starbase has become like hey, they put up a sign that says Starbase. It's got to be the official name. The sign makes it official.
absolutely, it
Starbase.
does, of course. Yeah, next flyover, hopefully they'll just, as they're building the roof, put a nice sign on it for the helicopter so we can see it of what they're going to call it.
Nice. I mean, I still remember the first day when I was driving on Kennedy Space Center and saw the sign that said Hangar X, except it's not Hangar Space X, it's Hangar X like SpaceX, like there's no space between Hangar and X. And I went, oh no, that's not what I thought this was called. But it's a sign, so you can't argue with the sign. Oh,
Yeah, it was
man.
quite confusing the first time that I saw that sign. It was definitely that moment of, oh, wait a minute, don't tell me.
um, anyway, taking a look at those stabilizer arms again, they're getting ready to remove the booster fully from the transport stand. Doing a quick A/B test, it does look like one of the arms, the one on the far side from this view, but on the other views you can kind of tell that it looks like it may have moved in. Yeah, the right-hand side one on this view, may be against the booster now, so they're proceeding slowly. I'm not sure what's all involved in this process. Like, what are the things they're checking? Why do things take the amount of time that they do? I actually have a relevant question from Adrian, not NSF's Adrian, NSF viewer Adrian, not NSF writer Adrian, who says, does SpaceX have personnel on the launch tower during a lift to check on clearances the same way NASA does at the VAB, etc.? They actually clear the launch site for these operations, right?
Yep, they do that. We actually saw before a car driving nearby, so we were like, oh,
Like,
please
that's a
not
bad
be
sign.
on board.
Yeah.
Yep. When there's people like around, that's a bad sign. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much everything, it seems like at this point, is automated with all of this, from getting it out there to lifting to getting it onto the OLM. A lot of automation.
Yeah, and I think that also goes in tandem with having a lot of like sensors and cameras and things. I mean, we haven't really heard details on this, but given that this is supposed to be an entirely remote controlled procedure, there's got to be a lot of cameras and things, and what they might be looking at right now is like confirming that the stabilizer arm has installed itself correctly before they do the other one. And then they'll be checking the transport stand is fully clear before they keep moving and things like that. And so there are obviously things to check. And of course, the more often they do this operation, the smoother it'll all go and the better they'll be at it. And perhaps even more things that can become automated. Because of course, there's the difference between automated and like remote controlled. But hopefully over time, more of this becomes an automatic process where, I don't know, maybe one day you just roll a booster up and the chopsticks go, oh, look, there's a booster. That means I have to lift it. And it just like does the rest of it itself. Who knows? Get some Tesla AI going in here or something.
I wonder if there's any of the technology also similar to what NASA does actually with the crawler, how it has that laser guidance that once it gets up towards the launch pad, it uses a laser signal basically to make sure it's perfectly aligned and perfectly flat and level. I wonder if there's some kind of system similar that's either in use or that SpaceX could use to make this go even smoother and quicker in the future.
Yeah, for sure. Got a quick question about that drone. People asking whose drone that is. That's a SpaceX drone, 100%. It is there's no, you cannot fly a drone at Starbase like where that drone was flying. Only SpaceX can because they're the property owners. So, like we couldn't fly drones around Starbase. That would be illegal. And just like anyone else other than SpaceX. So that's a SpaceX drone that they could be using that for legitimate engineering purposes, like another engineering camera that they can basically put wherever they want. It could also just be like, we're going to capture some cool video of the Booster 7 lift because it looks cool and we can tweet it. So who knows? But that's a SpaceX drone. Couple other memberships here. William Hart gifted a Red Team membership, so thank you, William, for that support. And Chininator with a Red Team membership, so thank you so much for joining on. Appreciate the support. Here's a quick question also from Jessica, another super chat question. Appreciate the support. Asking about the low resolution Falcon 9 launch that was on Saturday night. Why did that launch take the trajectory east of Florida instead of up the east coast like Starlink? That comes down to orbital inclination, and it's actually something that will definitely come into play on Starbase launches as well. It depends on what orbit you're going into. That launch was taking a pair of satellites to geostationary orbit, which is eventually going to have a 0-degree inclination, basically orbiting directly over the equator. So you want to launch due east from Florida so that your initial orbit is as low inclination as possible, so that the satellites have to work less hard, basically, expel less propellant to reach their final orbits. The Starlink missions, or at least most of them, of course, Starlink missions go to actually a lot of different inclinations, but the most common ones go up the east coast of the United States from Florida into like a 50-something degree inclination. What is it, 54?
I think it's 55.
55?
For Starlink, 53.2.
53.2. I was kind of close. But 50-degree inclination, which basically the math works out to flying up the coast of the United States from Florida. You can also reach it by going like southeast from Vandenberg, which they've done a couple times, but it's easier to go from Florida. But yeah, so it depends on what orbit you're going into. Similar with International Space Station missions, that's a 51.6 degree inclination. I remember that one, which is very similar to the Starlink inclination. You barely notice the difference, but that's again flying northeast. So it all depends on where the mission is going. Sometimes you'll have missions from Florida go due south along the polar launch corridor, which I can say that
Sorry for interrupting you. I believe the stabilizer on the left is already engaged.
Yeah, thank you. Oh yeah, it is. Look at that.
It is.
Yep.
So yeah, now you can really clearly see what we're talking about. That bottom triangle on the chopstick arm to the left, moving in to stabilize the booster. And,
so the next thing after this should be the pins on the transport stand at the bottom. Should be disengaged from the sockets they are in, and within a few minutes, maybe even seconds, we're gonna see a lift of Booster 7 all the way.
there you go.
We've seen it lifted, but it's not all the way.
It's been lifted, but it hasn't been installed. It has to be lifted, it has to be rotated, and then installed. But once it's fully like disengaged from the transport stand, the rest kind of all happens a lot quicker than some of these preliminary steps where they're like making sure that the booster is securely attached and things like that. Because then you're just moving the chopsticks, which is not disengaging or engaging different things.
Yeah, and then the next slowdown comes only as it's getting lowered onto the orbital launch mount.
Go ahead, sorry.
The Falcon 9 question before, because I love Falcon 9, as you always know. The next launch is going to be similar to the Galaxy launch, so get used to that, because we're going to see a couple of those going on. There's many of those kind of launches coming up, so yeah.
Yeah, the Firebird one.
Yeah, the Hotbird one.
The Hotbird, sorry.
I've heard like four different people think they were saying Hotbird, but said something like a weird variation of Hotbird. I think no one's remembering what the name of that mission is.
Yeah.
There's also Superbird as well.
Oh, that's why, because Superbirds are a thing. Oh no.
Yeah, but it was the contract that Starship won from JSAT. So yeah, there's Hotbird. There's also even the Falcon Heavy mission. He's going to the east instead of up the coast. So yeah, I mean, we're gonna see many of these launches. We're gonna have another one, another Galaxy launch next month. That's gonna be expendable. By the way, it's gonna have 51. It's gonna be sad to say goodbye. But yeah, there's gonna be 5 or 4 launches in the next couple of months, like that.
Just slightly off topic, the reason you're going to see so many of those is because many of these are communication satellites, and the spectrum that they currently work in on the C-band is being transitioned. The lower part is now going to be used for 5G. So anything that was using that lower part of the band now has to either move to the upper band, or in the case of many of these, launch a brand new satellite that doesn't interfere with 5G. And all of this is required by US law by the end of next year, by December of 2023. So that's why that cadence is going to pick up big time, especially for that particular type of orbit.
So coming back to Starship here, just pointing out what we're kind of expecting, the pins there on the left and on the right on that box there that you can see on the booster, that should be retracted, and kind of still looking at the glint of those beautiful tinfoils.
There you go. Thank you, Michael, for the art there. Michael Baylor pushing the buttons and pulling the levers on today's stream and offering us some artistic graphics to make sure we know what pins we're looking at here. Once those are disengaged, the booster will be cleared to move the rest of the way up.
Giving DASAR to run for its money here.
I do want to circle back to that inclination discussion, because that's super relevant for Starbase and will be as we get closer to the orbital launch. Do we know, and I think there's a document somewhere that talks about this, what the range of inclinations they can reach from Starbase is?
Don't know. And a big issue, of course, also with these launches is the fact that you have to avoid populated areas.
Right.
The FAA is not going to allow you to fly pretty much due east, because then you're overflying Florida, and if something happens, you run the risk of dropping rocket parts on people's houses.
Yeah, for the
Right.
first flight, we know it's gonna be kind of threading the needle between Florida and Cuba. But and probably for many of the first flights, obviously. But if you think about it, Starlink, even Starlink 2, is high inclination. It's like way more than 30 degrees. So we should get to a point where maybe doing a dogleg maneuver around maybe the Yucatan Peninsula, for example, might be a thing going forward. And that's actually represented on the paperwork that they did with the FAA for the environmental assessment, that eventually they will like to do those kind of flights from Boca Chica. But obviously, as we've seen already, they're also doing a launch site at 39A and maybe even more launch sites. We've seen a second tower being built there at the Cape. So there's a potential possibility that maybe in a couple of years we're going to see many more pads from the Cape, and that's a good place to be able to go into those kind of orbits. And at least the dogleg maneuvers don't kind of hit land for a long time. We've seen that for Falcon 9, the South Polar Corridor that they used.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen that even used for Starlink missions as well. So we might see that eventually with the Starship as well. And Starship has AFTS. It has the autonomous flight termination system. So that enters part of the kind of conditions of being able to use that corridor, that polar corridor. So we might see that eventually, not long from now.
All right. Keeping some questions coming here. Terminator has that question, Alex. I'm going to throw this one to you because you've been talking about it all stream. Why is that engine
Okay.
skirt section so shiny? What do we know about that actual protection?
Yeah, so this appears to be more like a sort of reflective fabric kind of thing. It looks like tinfoil. It's obviously not tinfoil. It's some sort of thermal shielding. As you can see, it's very reflective, so that might be the reason why it is located where it is located. It might be just to protect the engine bits for example, re-entry. Might be the case. What we are looking for, though, is the internal shields. So those are more supposed to kind of protect the engines from the rot of the engine. So basically, they are to protect the engines around, if that engine were to rot, but also to protect the engine itself from other engines being, exploded bits and things like that. But those here, as I said, they look more like a thermal kind of shield, where they just shield the engine from thermal loads instead of being an actual hard shield on protecting from exploding bits and things like that. I'm not sure if we're gonna see eventually that kind of shield going on there. We'll see. We'll see. We'll stay tuned into whatever happens. Maybe we won't know until this thing lifts off.
Right.
Once it
Yeah.
clears the tower.
I definitely think it is unlikely that that's the final design for protecting that engine section. Could even be temporary, not even for this flight, just for now. But
Exactly. It'll
only
be
one
interesting
way
to
to
see
find
what
out.
it'll be interesting what they start testing over at McGregor, see if that evolves as well and works its way
Yeah.
over to Texas or to Boca Chica.
I agree. Alright, I'm going to keep some questions coming here. Still waiting for the transport stand to release its grip on the booster so we can finish up here with a lift onto the stand. But let's see what other questions we may have here. Although there is a question in chat, or just a comment saying this might not be the final rollout for Booster 7 if that's a temporary shield. Is it? I mean, it's possible they could do work out at the pad. They have decent access, especially to the bottom of the booster, right, Sawyer? I mean, they could work on that section of the vehicle without rolling back, per se.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we've seen them access it down there quite a few times. In fact, like we mentioned, there is that Raptor that's sitting there that's going to be likely installed once it's on the orbital launch mount. So I don't think it's that far out of the question if they're already just attaching engines to remove anything that they would need to from around the engine.
Right. Alright, let me see what other questions we may have. Again, tag us at NASASpaceflight in chat, and I'm bringing those questions in while we wait for lift to resume here. Let's see. No, I don't think they're baking potatoes inside those big foil covers, although that's a good guess. Gotta love chat's contributions to our discussions here.
Yeah, trying very carefully just to keep it as foil rather than trying to debate the name of a certain element.
Yeah. Let's see. Here is actually a super chat question that is coming from Chris Salmon, who says, "Whatever happened to the SpaceX?" Oh my goodness, I should try to talk slower. Whatever happened to the SpaceX oil platforms? P.S. Happy Canadian Thanksgiving. Well, happy Thanksgiving to you, Chris. Basically, last I heard, and Sawyer, you can add to this, they're basically just like a lower priority, and they're focusing on like Starbase and KSC first.
That's my understanding as well. Is it's a great idea, but for now, especially if you've got the ability to hopefully land back at your launch site and get caught with the chopsticks, I think that will be first before we see anything with the oil platforms.
All right. Yeah, I think part of me wonders if they're still figuring out what exactly like the concept of operations would look like for like sea launch platforms, and you got to get vehicles out to the platforms. You have to have a method of like moving the platforms around, and where do you put the platforms? Are they going to be stationed somewhere more will a platform just station at the same place and they'll always launch from that spot, or are they going to move it based on what mission is launching? Like, there's a whole lot of questions that I think they need to figure out, and some of that might be informed by how the early test flights go and things like that. Whereas when they start planning trajectories for operational missions and things like that, so I think that definitely worth prioritizing the land launch sites for now, and hopefully that the sea launch platforms come down the road.
Yeah, and I could also see those probably being more crucial if we start seeing, as originally planned, using point to point. I think that might be a bigger deal as we get closer to that.
Alright, other questions that are coming in here. I've got a super chat here from Matt Hill, who says, "The material looks like a sort of barrier paper. When I used to work on aircraft, we used that to protect certain open areas to reduce the potential of FOD damage or stuff getting in." Right, I can totally see that, Matt, and I think that's as far as like a temporary protection, it could actually just be a FOD thing rather than like, oh, this will help the engines get protected during static fire until it flies, because then it'll just fall apart. It could definitely be more of a FOD barrier than a flight thing, or even a static firing thing. And of
Right,
course,
I hate to be like Chris and Chris here, but on, dare I say it, shuttle. I mean, even if you looked, there was basically paper that protected the ohms pods on the launch pad, is what it kind of looks like paper, but it was meant to protect it from the elements, and once it lifted off, those things actually flew off right away, and then you had your, or not the ohms pod, sorry, the maneuvering thrusters on board that protected them, and so basically those flew away and just worked as kind of FOD protection and weather protection. I could see something similar, although I would assume these would be removed before flight rather than kind of flying off.
Yeah. All right. Other questions here. JML with a super chat support. Appreciate that support as always. Modi Space Industries has joined the stream and says, "Was having a rough start to the day, but these streams always lift me up." Hashtag Thomas Fan Club. Modi Space, appreciate the super chat. Appreciate the terrible joke, but I hope you're having a good day now. Mike wants to know, if the oil rigs ever do become operational, will NSF have cameras on them? All I'm saying is that SpaceX knows how to contact us, and if they would like us to have cameras on the oil rigs, we will probably say yes. So, SpaceX, if you're listening, reach out.
Oh gosh,
of course,
don't tempt us with the idea.
The message did also say hashtag kayak cam, which I think is a Jack thing, so I might have to get Jack in on this conversation as well. Let's see. Let's see, what other questions we have? A lot of people just offering thoughts on the offshore platforms and thing we're waiting on. Updates on that down the line as far as Starship is concerned. Here is a question. Caltan Breaker's asking, is there such thing as differential thrust for rockets? Does the ship need the sea level Raptors with thrust vector control to steer? So basically the question, could they steer by just differing the throttle with the differing the throttle on the Raptor vacuum engines instead?
Yeah, that's so. When it says, "Is there such a thing as differential thrust for rockets?" Yes. So one thing I should point out: SpaceX already uses differential throttle. Thankfully, it is not that common. So the reason why I say this is because that's on Dragon, on the escape system. Super Dracos are obviously not able to gimbal, but they are able to throttle down and throttle up. So the way that they actually steer Dragon away from the rocket on an abort is via differential throttling. So obviously, thankfully, we only have seen that twice, from the pilot abort test and the in-flight abort test, and thankfully we haven't seen it used any other time. But they can do that, and they do that. Now, will they use that on Starship? Whether you can remove the sea level thrust Raptors and just keep the vacuum ones. Apart from the fact that you will probably not be able to do everything as well as with a gimbal engine. It's also the fact that you will lack more thrust. So the reason of the sea level engines as well, it's not just the TVC system, it's not just the gimbal, but it's also the added thrust. As soon as you go off from MECO and stage separation, the ship is still very low and very slow from on its trip to orbit. So you need more push at that point in the flight. Later on, once it's faster and higher, and it has less propellant on board, then you can turn off the center engines, the ones with a gimbal, and then it's okay. You can basically rely on the vacuum engines and do the whole thing, and probably even for translunar injections or things like that, you may only need the vacuum engines. Still, you may want to have around those center engines just for the added thrust and that kind of thing. And obviously the TVC system also helps. So yeah, it's not just that they can get rid of it easily. Like, yeah, they could, but it's nice to have those center engines.
Yeah, sounds good to me. Thank you for the question there. Still waiting on this lift to get underway, but we should see the transport stand pins disengage hopefully soon. But got plenty of questions to keep going, so we'll just keep doing that for now. Michael with a super chat says, "Thanks for a stress reliever. All kids' babysitters called in sick, so it's daddy daycare for me. Well, I hope they're enjoying watching some Texas tank watching with you. Does this count as Texas tank watching? I mean, there are tanks on Booster 7, and it is in Texas, and we are watching. I think this counts."
I think so. There are also tanks in nearby frames sometimes, so yeah, why not?
Here's a good question, and we can see it really clearly on this view. How can they fly with the chines missing that bottom panel? If you look on the left-hand side, there's like an opening near the bottom of the chines, which are those like triangular-shaped aerodynamic structures on the side of the booster. Did we see them like work on that part of the booster, and they were like just opening that up for access or whatever? Do we know anything about why that panel was removed or whatever?
I don't myself. I don't know if Alex, you know?
Huh. Well, I have been wondering myself the same thing for a long time. It's probably not gonna fly like this, but maybe they just send it like this. Who knows? You can also see the bottom part of the chine. You can see it's not a perfect weld between the sections. It's open. You can see some daylight even on the right one. so obviously, what's the reasoning behind that? Whether it can fly with the chines not completely sealed and completely everything, it's always a guessing game here. We don't have straight answers, obviously. So yeah, it might need a couple of questions on Twitter, like, "Hey Elon, do you know? What's the whole deal with this?" So there you go.
Yeah, definitely just a work in progress in some regard, where the teams are still working on getting this booster ready for flight, and there's going to be things open and tinfoil wrapped around engines, and engines missing and things like that. Anyway, another question here from Richard. This is actually about the Starbase, or not Starbase. Try this again. Oh wait, did they just disengage the transport stand pins?
That
Question
was
mark.
fast. Yep.
That was I swear I looked like 10 seconds ago and they were still there, and now they're just gone. All right,
Wow.
so they
Yeah.
have disengaged the pins on the bottom of the booster.
Imminent.
And basically, if you can see really well on the left-hand side of your screen, where that kind of rectangular, I guess it's a trapezoid from the side thing on the side of the booster that contains, I believe there's the hydraulic power unit is what's housed in there. Near the bottom of that, there's like a little divot that you can see there, and that's where the transport stand was connected to the booster, and that just retracted. So basically, the booster should be free and clear to be lifted the rest of the way out of the transport stand here shortly.
Yeah, those really did pop out quick there. But again, this is the hardest. This is the waiting part here. Once, as you mentioned, once we start getting the next motion, it should be pretty smooth from there on out as it lifts and then rotates over to the orbital launch mount.
Yeah. All right, jumping back into this question that I was about to ask before I was so rudely interrupted. I'm kidding. Richard Meyer asking about another tower they're building at the Kennedy Space Center. Obviously, they just finished stacking the first one, but there are parts for a second already at Roberts Road. Asking if it could also be used for the new crew tower, as SpaceX has talked about adding crew capabilities to Slick 40 so that they have 2 Crew Dragons launch sites. I believe our basic consensus is that it doesn't make any sense for those parts to be for a crew tower. They have the same equipment for like chopstick systems and things like that, which you would never put on a tower that's not going to be used for Starship. So I think that it's more likely they are getting ahead of wherever the next Starship launch site on the East Coast is going to be, because they have plans at Launch Complex 49. There's also a possibility of building another site farther south on the Space Force side. Or even potentially a dedicated catch tower for now at landing zone 1 or 2. They could also just turn the LZ 1 and 2 complex into also being able to support Starship operations, including launch if they wanted to. But anyway, it's basically unlikely that is anything to do with Slick 40, and that a tower on that launch complex would look very different. But it's definitely, I totally understand the spirit of the question there. Definitely check over the latest Cape Flyover if you want to catch up on the latest on Starship infrastructure over at Kennedy Space Center.
If I were to bet, if you want my bet, I will bet on Launch Complex 49. That's probably going to be the location of the next tower. Might
I have
just be
learned
me.
to stop betting about SpaceX things, so I'm just
I
gonna.
know. Yeah. If we do this for timelines, why not?
Which,
Listen,
by the
I'll
way,
predict timelines, but I'm not betting anything on it because I know I'm probably wrong.
Okay, well, not betting, but like predicting the next location. Okay, I'll change my words. Jeez.
Which, by the way, LC-49 would be north of 39 A and B currently at the Kennedy Space Center, just for reference.
Yeah, I cannot wait until Artemis 1 has a Starship tower next door. Oh, sorry, I should have said Artemis 2. It's okay. It was a bad joke. Well, the whole timings and everything that it's taking.
Oh boy.
No, but now without the joke, it's gonna be really cool to see more towers and sharing next door to SLS. It's gonna be really exciting.
Oh, absolutely. The fact that we're seeing so many towers popping up there now, you've got everything for Blue Origin, for Relativity, all these companies popping up now with their own platforms on either the Space Force side or the Kennedy Space Center side, and always down for more rockets and more launches.
Missile Row back in action. except
Yeah.
without missile.
Yeah,
Starship
back when
row.
I mean, they were predicting a 39 A, B, C,
left.
D onward.
Up there we go.
There,
Yep,
right.
lifting.
All right, so now up, and now we're gonna get to see those Raptors.
The juicy stuff.
Oh, that is those are beautiful still. So does anyone know the thrust to weight ratio, the TWR on the chopsticks here now? Now that it's lifting off?
More than one. Enhance. See, if they hadn't waited so long, we could probably have had a better view, but, it's approaching noon now.
Mhm.
So, yeah. SpaceX, why don't you do this when we actually want this to happen? I cannot believe you do this to us. It's a joke, it's a joke. Joking.
I mean, these are still
Yeah.
great views.
Yeah, it's impressive. It's always mind-blowing. I remember the first time they lifted one of these with all the engine
Yeah.
bay.
Oh yeah.
Well, the first time they did a booster lift like ever, like without the chopsticks, it was just with a crane, and you had all the people around with like the guide wires and stuff. That was like, I think Jack got a really good picture of. I think a lot of our photographers got really good photos of it. But just like the view of like a giant rocket booster with a bunch of engines on the bottom and like a bunch of people standing around it was like one of the coolest looking things. And of course, the booster still looks super impressive with all of those engines on the bottom. But there's no people around. There's no like sense of scale in that sense, I think. Still really cool to see, though. Also, we're going to have to get a look and see if we can figure out which of those engine slots is missing.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah,
it's
yeah.
one of the center engines, one of the ones on the
Mhm.
cluster of 3 engines in the middle.
So right now, obviously, we're going to see until the bottom of that booster. We'll get decently above the orbital launch mount, get some clearance there, and then they'll rotate the chopsticks over to align it with the launch mount, and then they'll set it down.
Still something amazing about just seeing that basically mid-air being swung over to the launch area. Doesn't get old.
So shiny. Look at that.
Yeah, also gets a better view of those foil, quote-unquote foil covers there.
Come on, a little bit higher so we can see if there's any shields. Yeah, you can see one of the Raptors missing in the middle. It
can
looks
you?
awful. It looks off. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I'm having
can
trouble
see-
making it out on my screen. I think that's a me problem.
When it says 86, there's between 34 and 86 there's an engine. That's one of the ring of 10. Right behind that one there's another one next to it. So and that's where it's missing. Instead of 3 there are 2 there.
So not in the second ring from the outside, but the ring inside there. You're saying there's a Raptor missing?
Yeah, the innermost engines.
Oh yeah,
Instead of
okay.
Yeah.
It's
Gotcha.
3, 10, and 20, but instead it's 2, 10, and 20.
Offset asymmetrical thrust confirmed on Starbase on Starship. Oh, I keep messing up Starbase. Too many things that start with star. Starlink, Starliner. There's so much.
Starliner.
So much.
Starlink, Starbricks, which are the tiles.
Oh yeah.
Oh, yeah.
jeez.
Starship,
Star Factory.
Starhopper.
Anyway, they should have called Raptor Star Engine.
Oh gosh.
They should not have. To be very clear, they should not have.
I agree.
Oh no! Really quick, Eric Hutchins with a $20 Canadian dollar super chat. So thank you for the support there, Eric. Appreciate it. And John Reese upgraded to the Capcom level. So John, thank you for the support. Hope you'll join in on the Discord discussion at that level of membership. And again, we appreciate that.
Some people talking about the sense of scale. Just a reminder: every single ring in that thing is 6 feet tall. So I'm 5'5". Okay, I actually know that in Imperial, by the way. I'm a European guy, but I know that in Imperial. So I'm 5'5". Every ring on Super Heavy or Starship for that matter, is taller than me. So just to give a sense of scale.
Oh,
And
geez.
I think there are like 36 rings on Super Heavy. So just imagine, it's like 36 people.
There you go. You can see
Really
the
big.
chopsticks now rotating over into place. Like I said, once they get off of the transport stand, these things go a lot quicker. So the booster's already lifted high enough, and now the sticks are actually rotating from over the transport stand to over the launch mount.
A great view there. You can actually see the motion of it.
I'm going to keep another question here from the pro asking, is this SpaceX's first booster lift with the arms? I do not believe so. They never lifted booster 4 with the arms, right?
Yeah.
I believe
But
this
they
is the
lifted
second
booster
time
7.
with the arms.
This is the third.
Oh, third.
So
This is the third?
They lifted it once in June, I think it was, but then it was brought down because of the whole explosion, after the 33 engine spin prime, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
When they came here back with only 20 engines, the chopsticks broke. So like not the chopsticks themselves, but like the hydraulics.
Uh-huh.
So they had to put it with a crane. But the next time, so it did a couple of tests. They brought it back to the Mega Bay. They rolled it out again a few weeks later, and I think that was August 23rd. The next lift that they did with the chopsticks, and here this is the third time, and it's actually taking less time. I believe the first one took like we were live for 6 hours or so. Then the second one we were live for only, I think it was 3 hours, and we've been live for 2 hours now. So they're getting there every single time, getting less and less time to be able to do this. Granted, though, they had an abort on Friday, so count it as you will, but they had
Yeah,
some
sure.
previous time there on Friday.
Alright. Thank you for that. Another question asking if there's any idea on when we'll see a full stack, maybe today. We haven't seen any signs of Ship 24 also being stacked with the chopsticks today. I think our expectation is that will happen later. I think the ship would have to be moved. I think we touched on this earlier. The ship has to be moved closer to the launch tower for the chopsticks to reach it, right? Like it can't be reached from where it is now.
That's my understanding. I believe it would have to be a lot closer to be able to get right in line with the connection points on the chopsticks. Plus, you kind of needed to move Booster 7 out of the way first before you can get that into place.
Yep.
So, yeah, I think we're expecting a full stack not today. I think it remains basically...
my fan in my heart, it's like... my fan inside me, it's like, yes, I would like a stack as soon as possible, but there's also my part that is a little bit more realistic. So yeah.
I think it just comes down to what the testing schedule is going to look like. Do they want the ship stacked for the next testing? And if not, then what the heck is the ship doing right next to the launch mount if they're going to test the booster without it? There's also Booster 8 that's just chilling there hoping that no one forgot about it. So there's that to be considering as well, but I don't think they'll be focusing much on Booster 8 when they can be testing the vehicles for the first flight test first. Another question asking, did SpaceX give up on catching starships? Thanks. I don't think we've really... we haven't had an opportunity for them to do much with the way of attaching starships because you have to get a starship to orbit first. But I think, we haven't heard anything about landing legs, so gotta have some way to recover them. I think the current plan is to at least consider having Starship be caught by the chopstick arms.
That's the latest I've heard as well.
Mm-hmm.
Especially compared to some of the original test ships that were used, like going up to SN-15. Even the landing legs they had on those early flights were pretty small, and I think in a way to kind of not impact the aerodynamics of it and just test the whole landing concept as a whole. I don't see even those small ones being added to any of the new rockets, so I would hope that means that we get some chopstick catches soon.
Yeah.
I'm seeing a whole discussion on the metric system and Imperial.
I wasn't going to say anything, but yeah.
Okay, I'll say it in metric. I actually know the conversion. 6 feet is 1.8280 something meters. I know it all the way to a millimeter, but I don't know farther beyond that. So there you go. I actually know the conversion because I have had to do a lot of conversions between feet and meters by calculating like the height of the booster and how tall the tanks are and things like that, just for kind of back of the napkin kind of calculations on the volumes and things like that. Just because I'm curious, and I was like, hey, I want to calculate this, and that's what I've done, you know, a few times. So I know that conversion off the top of my head.
There you go.
The only conversion I know of is relating to the engines is aluminum to aluminium. Sorry.
No. Listen, I just know that the thrust is always equal to 3. Plutonium 239 with the super chat questions: how many Raptors will they likely light off during the next static fire? So that ties right in with what's the testing going to look like next. If they did 7 engines last time, what's the next step in static fire testing? Are they jumping to 33, or is there an interim step? What do you think, Sawyer?
Ooh, that's a good question. I mean, obviously, we'd all love to see it go straight to 33. That's the end goal, and boy, that's going to be beautiful when it does. But I could see them kind of jumping intermediary because they learned a lot. It seems like just from the 7-ended static fire. I can imagine maybe working their way up to 20-ish engines, and then finally going to all 33 before their orbital test flight.
What do you think,
And all
Alex?
speculation.
Yeah.
I'm thinking maybe half of them.
Okay.
Like
16, 17?
16, yeah, or 17, yeah. Somewhere around that. Obviously, the problem is we cannot, when there's so many engines, there comes to a point where actually SpaceX has to tell us how
Right,
many
because
engines.
we can't tell, yeah.
Exactly, because we cannot tell. It's like, yeah, the difference between 15 and 16 or even 17 will probably not be really noticeable. But obviously, you will probably be able to tell whether it's all engines, or like maybe 20 or 15 or 16 or something like that. Now, do I believe it's gonna be like one cluster of engines or something like that? It seems like they have been trying to get so multiple engines from different clusters. So not just the inner 3 or the middle 10 or the outer 20. They have been kind of mixing, and that makes sense in like you will like to be able to test different engines on different positions instead of just one cluster. Because if you just test one cluster, you're like, okay, now I know all of these engines work the way that they are supposed to, but I don't know about the others. Whereas if you test different configurations, you can test different plumbing and different engine positions and things like that. So uh, we might see that and be like not just one cluster, being multiple engines on multiple locations.
For me, what's going to be really interesting when they do those more engine static fire testing, especially up to 33, is going to be the deluge system and all the rings and things they've been adding to the orbital launch mount to prepare for that many more engines. See how they do with protecting the vehicle, the sound suppression, and what ends up happening to that launch mount.
There you go. Thank you for the question there, Plutonium. Let's see here. Oh yeah, quick question in chat asking about that missing engine. The reason we were looking for that is because yes, there is a Raptor engine literally just sitting underneath the orbital launch mount, and so presumably once the booster is installed, they're going to go ahead and install that engine, which just wasn't installed in the high bay for whatever reason. But looks like they have finished rotating the booster. It's now just over the launch mount, and we should see it start to get lowered down here shortly, hopefully.
Yeah, that should come up really, really soon, and you can actually see. At least I notice even better now, like the hole in the engine cluster.
Yeah.
Right there. You can kind of see like one is missing, or
yeah, you can.
Mhm.
So right now we'll just see them lowering booster 7, and I mentioned before that the OLM also has pins, stabilizer pins, as just as the stand. However, here on the OLM, they do not go up. They do not go, a couple of meters up from the OLM. They actually swivel. It's just a slight angle that they can swivel up and down. Well, actually not down, but just up. Um, but yeah, and so we're gonna see this going down into the orbital launch mount, and then these pins are gonna be basically swiveling up a little bit. You can see one of them on this left-hand view, right next to the booster cutie. So you can see there like a box. Thanks, Michael, for that. For that. And you see there's like a black box there. That's the cutie of the booster. Right next to it, like all the way to the right, you can see there's like a beam on the OLM, a horizontal beam, and that's actually the pin itself that I'm talking about. I can see now they're lowering the booster, by the way, or at least I'm kind of noticing a lowering of the booster.
It is moving down, yes.
Yep, there you go. I was not mad about that. I was not crazy. So yeah, that is gonna swivel a little bit. It's gonna go into the sockets on that box there that is called the hydraulic power unit. The outer cover of that is the box thing on the booster side. And that's actually what it's going to do. It's going to help them to position the booster in the right location, along with the stabilizers on the top and the arms themselves, so that then the clamps on the OLM can go and grab the booster. And not only the clamps, but there are also QDs that go into the outer engines and everything. So all of that is basically going to engage. As soon as the booster is in the right position, that's going to be engaging and be able to be put into place.
All right. Well, booster being lowered down onto the launch mount now, and this is again setting Booster 7 up on the orbital launch mount for continued testing and preparation for launch. This could, in theory, be the last ever lift and install of a booster. Well, not last ever. Maybe I should say of this booster, of Booster 7. Because if testing goes well, Booster 7 should only leave the launch mount when it is launching, with Ship 24 on top. Of course, that does rely on how the testing goes. We do have a question here from Simon asking if this is a pre-programmed maneuver controlled by the computer, or is there a person controlling this remotely with a joystick or something like that? Do we know, once the booster gets lifted up by the chopsticks, can it do the rest of it just automatically by itself, or any insight into that?
You want to go, Sawyer?
I'll toss this one to you, Alex, because I honestly don't know the answer myself.
Well, I actually don't know. I just can guess because we don't have any insight into how these operations work. So yeah, it'll just be a guy with a joystick, or it might be automated, but with human inputs. Like you command the computer to do X thing, and then the computer does it. And when it's finished the task, then the human has to go and look at the cams and see that the task was completed, successfully and things like that. And then it commands, the person commands another kind of task for the computer to do. So it could be a mix. It could be a guy with a joystick. We don't really know. We don't have full insight into this.
It's actually just an integration with Kerbal Space Program. There's a KOS script that someone has written to control. I'm completely joking. Listen, if there's a possibility for a real spaceflight company to use Kerbal Space Program as their control software, I'm there.
I mean, you do have a lot of automation already at Starship or at Starbase itself.
Yeah.
Getting it out to the pad. You've got even the dogs that are roaming around too, the robotic dogs. There's a lot of cool stuff going around there. I wouldn't be surprised if there is some form of automation with the ability to have input from a human.
Mm-hmm. Another question here from John Dipker, who says, why are the Kennedy Space Center towers chopsticks stubbier than the Boca towers? Why the design change? My guess, and I'll open this up if you guys have other guesses, but mine is simply that, if you look at the right-hand view right now, you can see that those chopsticks are longer than the booster is, and so it doesn't seem like they need to be that long for stacking purposes, and maybe they are guessing that, or have reason to believe, that even during catch attempts, you don't need like that much space on the chopsticks to reliably secure a booster, and so it simply makes sense to make them smaller because they don't need to be that big. Alex, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, there's been a lot of debate on whether the chopsticks are shorter because they're not going to catch any boosters. But I've always been sort of the opinion that it doesn't really matter. The chopsticks are going to have the rails still. They're going to have the location where the booster lands on the chopsticks, it's basically the same. I mean, to a certain degree, obviously, of approximation. Once it lands, you still have to adjust it to the right position. Excuse me. But the, the location is still the arms. It doesn't matter if it's at the end of the arm. It's actually probably counterproductive. What's the word? Like, you probably don't want the boosters to land on the ends of the arms because of the lever arm of the weight of the
Physics.
booster. Yep, physics
Yeah.
all the way down. So
No, it's pins all the way down, Alex.
okay, pins all the way down. So it makes sense to, if you don't need that end part of the arms, why do you have it? Like, just delete it. That's the whole thing with Elon, right? He's like, best part is no part. So if you don't need that part of the arms, just delete it. And actually, we have seen there's a whole debate. I think that debate has been cleared out already because we have seen catching hardware. So there have been some sightings. If you can see that on our latest flyover video, by the way, it's right there. We have shown it, and you can see there's pistons, and those pistons are used for the rails on the chopsticks to kind of it's partly shock absorbers and also adjustments for the booster right after it lands on the arms. So it's part of the catching system of the arms, and it's there at the chopsticks that they're gonna be on 39A. So guess what? Those arms are not just gonna be for stacking; they're also gonna be for catching. Now, do we think a catch is gonna happen anytime soon at 39A as soon as they launch? Of course not. That place is sacred, sort of, like that place is not gonna see any sort of landings on the arms until way later into this reliability process, where they just start catching boosters here at a Starbase, and if it works, well, they start to try at 39A. That's how they did it with Falcon 9, where they started out first at the ocean without any barges. Then they started putting the barges. The barges came with bits of booster on the deck and like holes and things like that. But eventually they were able to be confident enough to be able to go back on land. And that's actually the first time they landed a Falcon 9 successfully. So yeah, it's gonna follow the same thing. And just because the chopsticks are shorter, it doesn't mean it's not gonna be for catching. They're actually gonna get catching hardware. So there you go.
And also, I don't know if this has any effect on it as well, but the location of that tower within the confines of 39A, it is very close to the fence line on the side. And so, I mean, that kind of limits how long it can be. Plus, you also have 39A, the main pad for Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy, really close. So I don't know if extending outward could impact, say, if you were working on dual operations of preparing a Falcon and a Starship.
There's also this rhetoric because of the whole deal of landing back on land or even launching from 39A with Starship, that somehow NASA is not allowing SpaceX to launch Starship from there. Oh, drone.
Oh, hello, drone.
Hi. That's a bigger one than the last one that we saw.
Just
Yeah,
hanging
so-
out.
I actually talked to someone who works with pad integration at 39A ahead of the Crew 5 launch, and they were telling me that they are working with SpaceX. NASA and SpaceX are working together on the safety and the location of Starship and their pad in relation to the historic portion of 39A. So it is something that is being looked at.
Yeah, that's actually the same kind of thing that I've been hearing all this time. Like, the location of the launch pad, for example, in the launch tower, has been specifically like co-design, not co-design, but co-thought that they have been basically along with NASA, just basically doing all these steps jointly, not SpaceX on their own. And they chose the location just for protecting the Falcon hardware and things like that. Like all of these places are being carefully selected just for that matter, and it makes sense. NASA is not saying don't launch Starship or don't catch a Starship. They're just saying, hey, it's not a mature vehicle, right? And you're launching it right next to the place where you're launching astronauts for us. We want a little bit more assurance that the thing is not gonna explode and ruin all the Falcon hardware. So yeah, it's a legit complaint. I will say. I will have the same, not complaint, but more like a concern, right? I will obviously have it, and I have it, right? But I also know SpaceX is going to do everything that they can to be able to not have any rod that could destroy the pad. They are going to great lengths to actually not do it here, in the first place at a Starbase. So, yeah, I have full confidence, to be honest, because I know them, and I believe in that.
I will also just add, here's a good data point when everyone's gets thinking, like, oh, it's really risky to try to land a super heavy booster near a launch site or whatever. SpaceX has made lots of, actually I can pull out the exact number, hold on, I have a spreadsheet for this.
Ooh.
SpaceX has made 21 plus 9 is 30 return to launch site landing attempts between LZ1, LZ2, and LZ4. Only one of them has failed. That's the CRS-16 mission, a Falcon 9 from Florida, which tried to land at LZ1 and failed due to the grid fin failure. We were actually talking about that earlier. And it safely splashed down off the coast of the landing zones. So, of the 30 RTLS attempts that SpaceX has done with a Falcon booster, all but one of them has been successful, and the one that didn't fail didn't break anything at the landing zone or anything like that. I understand like why people would be worried, and maybe the higher stakes because of what 39A like means to the spaceport. Like 39A's crew launch capability is important, but I really do think that the risk is appreciably low, and they can definitely, they can very easily prove that they can land without unnecessary risk. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and also on that same note, I was just remembering right now, she mentioned that the other day we saw the launch of the Galaxy mission with a landing. That landing was a 72nd landing in a row since the last failure that they had on a landing. The last failure was in February 2021. They have done 72 launches since then, all of them attempting a landing, and all of them with a landing that was successful. Obviously, this was like after 100 launches of Falcon 9, but still, it kind of shows you that you can get actually a good reliability of the landings. Right now, the landings on Falcon 9 are to a point where it's actually even reliable than some of the launch statistics of some of the most prestigious rockets out there. Like it's getting close to Atlas V launch streak of successful launches, for example. So, yeah, no, go ahead, Sawyer.
I was going to say, it's an interesting point being brought up in the back channel that I do agree with, is that as it's coming down, I mean, most of the fuel is expended, and you're not using all 33 of the Raptors. It's a lot more dangerous, it seems like, at the actual liftoff point when you are completely full of liquid oxygen and methane, and when you have 33 Raptor engines all firing at once. I could definitely see that being a little more of a damage risk to 39A than the landing portion, where it's a lot emptier and a lot, hopefully, less explodey.
At the end of the day, as you said, it's still not a lot of propellant. The risky part is probably going to be more the launch itself. And if it were to be, in theory, a kind of launch tower only and not catching tower, as it was sort of the whole debate earlier, it will still be dangerous. because I mean you will have such a huge vehicle with so much propellant on board. And we recently heard from Bill Gistermeyer, one of the SpaceX's vice president. He's vice president of Bill and flight reliability. Long time NASA head of human exploration operations and things like that. He knows a ton about this, and he was saying, we're gonna do flights from the Starbase, and once we consider it reliable enough to bring it to 39A, that's when we bring it. So he didn't even mention catches. He was already
Right,
talking about
sure.
launches, because the launch itself, it's actually what is probably more risky because of all the propellant on board the rocket. You wouldn't want sort of like an N1 kind of thing where the rocket lifts off and then it falls back. That's not a good thing that you would like to have. But if you fly a couple of times, you can have already enough data to be able to say, okay, it's good enough for a flight. We have already done enough fuelings and enough, a couple of launches or 3 might even be enough for that.
Alright, I want to move us on because we've been talking about the same thing for a while, but yes, obviously all eyes on 39A as well with regards to Starship. Booster getting settled down onto the launch mount right now, so let's finish up some questions and things here. Really quick, Jonathan Tucker is asking, what are the most engines ever fired on a rocket? I believe that title goes to the N1?
Correct. Yeah, the N1, which was powered by 30 NK-15 engines, although it never made it successfully into orbit, so there
Right.
was some quite beautiful explosions.
There certainly were, but that is technically the record holder, at least until Super Heavy lights all 33 of its engines. Let's see. Austin asking, do you think they'd ever have 2 sets of chopsticks for both booster and ship for catching? I think the general concept is that you would catch a booster and be able to put it onto the launch mount or onto a transport stand or whatever well before the ship returned from orbit. And so you only need 1 set of chopsticks, even if the same tower is going to be used for both. But you'll also have, the option of like launch from Starbase and then the ship lands in Florida or whatever. Like you don't necessarily have to land on at the same site that you launched from. You can, but you don't necessarily need to. But anyway, yeah, I don't think you need 2 sets of chopsticks on like the same arm or anything.
Right, and as you get more and more efficient and quicker with it, you will only need 1 and it'll work pretty darn fast.
Right. And actually, right on cue, Jerry is asking what are the chances of full stacks launching from 39A and catching in Boca? Like you just said, could totally do that. Just depends on how they plan the missions and like where they're scheduled to launch next from. Like, think about airline-like operations. Airlines plan for, okay, we're going to fly an airplane from this airport to this airport, and the whole flight schedule is based on where are all your aircraft operating from and going to, and how can you support another flight from there, and you can operate launch vehicles similarly if you are operating them often enough. Will Wren upgraded their membership to the red team, so we appreciate that support. Smooth Juice says, don't forget to smash the likes. Couldn't agree more. So if you do want to show your support for the NSF stream, we definitely appreciate those who hit the like button. Do you think they could throttle the booster back up if it's coming in for a RUD to save Mechazilla? Yeah, so the booster will have some sort of logic where during the landing burn, if something is going wrong and it has the ability to abort from the launch site and into the water or anything, it can do that. But yeah, basically it has the ability to decide during the landing burn whether it's going to land or it needs to abort.
Right, we mentioned earlier that it will likely target away from the actual landing site first, like Falcon does, and then if everything is okay health-wise on the vehicle, then turn itself in for a proper catch and landing.
Yeah, so I believe we're already seeing one of the Olin pins on the right side, on the left camera view on the right, we see one of those pins getting into the hydraulic power unit outer cover. So that's sort of the indication that the lift is very, very close to an end now.
Mm-hmm.
The next thing will be right after that. Yep, there you go. Thanks, Michael, for that art.
There we go. Thank you, Michael. Art on Michael Art on full display today. We appreciate you, Michael.
Yeah. So once those OLM pins engage, that kind of helps the booster to be adjusted further, like more subtle adjustments to the position,
More
and then
precisely.
yep. And once they do that, once it is already in the place that they want it to be, they close the clamps, they put the QDs to the engines and all that, and it's done. It's saved, but we cannot see that. So because it's all it's all in the middle, it's all in the way there. Um. So yeah, sadly we cannot see the holdouts. That will be cool though. Maybe we shall ask SpaceX for some footage from the OLM.
There you go. A question here asking, what are the 4 pieces jutting out of the booster above the engine plate? Is it just fuel tanks or something else? I believe they're talking about the chines, which are primarily a aerodynamic thing. Basically helps the booster have a little bit more cross-range capability. It can like bleed off more of its energy on the way down before it has to light the booster, so that saves you some fuel weight. But inside those chines, I think they're using that space to hold like COPVs and things like that, right?
Yeah, the big ones, those have CUPVs inside. Then there are small chines, as I call them. I believe there are more like strakes on the backside, and I'm not sure what their function is. They do not have any CUPVs inside, so
Okay.
might be related with that kind of aerodynamic profile they're gonna have during reentry. But I have no idea.
Gotcha. Let's see. Chat's still asking about a full stack today. The ship is not in position. Ship 24 needs to be moved closer to the launch mount for the chopsticks to be able to reach. And I think our best bet is that they're gonna not stack imminently. Of course, NSF will be live when that full stack does occur, but they have that Raptor engine that you can see actually on the left-hand side view. You can see the wrapped up Raptor sitting below the booster. They have that work to do. They may have other booster testing to do before the ship is stacked on top and things like that. It would definitely take some time after this booster is installed for the chopsticks to even be ready to stack a ship on top. So we'll keep an eye on it and see when a full stack may occur, but it's not happening, right after this, I don't think. Let's see. There's a question from Pim asking, what about the testing is about the newly installed protection on the hold down clamps? I am not sure what this question is talking about. Do either of you?
Yeah, so they have installed some shields on the sides of the clamps, and like the QDs and things like that they have for the engines. Not fully sure what the purpose of those shields might be. Probably for more robustness upgrades, but instead of for Booster 7, instead being for OLM upgrades for the orbital launch mount. Now, it might just be for simple protection, but it also might be related with, like, if there's a Raptor that goes, the wrong way, they're going to be testing now all engines soon. So they probably wanted to make sure first that they were able to fire them. But then they were like, okay, we're going to make sure that, any of this doesn't really makes anything go melt or like explode inside the OLM. So that way you can protect all the internal bits of the OLM, which is nice.
Gotcha. Jerwa with another super chat who says, I for one cannot wait until we get to a time where ferry flights are needed for rockets. There you go. Appreciate the support there. And then here's a question.
They're ferry barges for now.
Very good point, very good point. Robert says, instead of firing all engines at once at launch, is it possible that, for example, the outside engines fire at takeoff and the inside ring fire at a certain altitude? I don't think you're going to see that, simply because one of the reasons you fire all your engines a couple seconds before releasing it from the mount is that it gives you a chance to make sure that all of the engines are working properly. You also basically want your booster to be at full thrust at liftoff to minimize gravity losses, which is basically if you fire at less than full thrust, you are basically wasting energy fighting gravity for longer than you need to. So it is very unlikely that they would air light some of the booster engines. Sawyer, what do you think?
Yeah, you're also at that point going to be carrying dead weight too. If the engines are there and not really firing, they're just adding more mass, like you mentioned, that you have to fight against if you want to get to orbital velocity. And the big thing, as you mentioned, is the fact that as those engines ramp up, That's why a lot of times you'll see engines light well before T0, or you'll see a clock hit T0, the engines ignite, and 3 or 4 seconds before it actually moves, is the vehicle doing its own self-system check to make sure everything's functioning, there's no leaks, and you're getting the amount of thrust you expected. There have been Falcons in the past where at T-minus 2 seconds, T-minus 0.5, the automated systems on board have noticed that an engine has been out of family, as they call it, and it auto-scrubs.
Right. So yeah, I think I'll agree with you there, Sawyer. Let's see. Here's an interesting question from Tin Man, who says, does the rocket need to be cylindrical in order to make it to space, or can it be square or orthogonal and still be aerodynamic? It's actually a very interesting question. Obviously, you see a lot of things like on the side of this booster that make it not a perfect cylinder, and that's not usually a big deal. The reason that tank structures on rockets and things like that are usually cylindrical, this also applies to airplanes, by the way, is that because a circle or a sphere, either a sphere or a cylinder, are the best shapes to maintain equal pressure. If you have something that's like square shaped or something, you will have great above that, you won't have a uniform like forces on the outside of your pressure vessel, and the corners get more stress than, and the corners and the seams get more stress from pressurizing that tank than they would if it was just a sphere. So keeping those round structures help keep things like rocket propellant tanks, or even just little bottles like the COPVs that are just carrying gas or whatever. Those can be made a lot stronger by making them round in shape, and that's why most of the aerospace structures you see are round in some way, either a cylinder or a sphere. Much actually less about aerodynamics. So that's a really good question. Let's see. Mars Lab says, regardless of additional weight, I think the booster needs a Texas-sized SpaceX logo. Thanks for all you do, NSF. Appreciate that, Mars Labs, and it would be cool to see a big old SpaceX logo on the booster, but given that they already marked up the ship with some smaller SpaceX logos, I wonder if the booster's not really going to get a paint job or anything like that.
I'm waiting for once we get to the HLS, seeing the big old NASA logo painted on it, too.
Yeah, hopefully they get that meatball logo right, because
oh gosh,
messed up the last one.
Yeah, that wasn't pretty.
It wasn't great.
Don't look at it.
Don't look at it. Don't look at it. Good reference. Good reference.
Well, the good news is it is burnt up in the atmosphere. We never have to deal with it again.
This is true. This is true. That's on the upper stage, so we're good. Raymond has a question. Where did the Falcon Heavy launch from, with how many engines, and how did NASA feel about it then? So I think a point to be made that they did launch a 27-engine Falcon Heavy booster from 39A. However, some differences there, especially because Falcon Heavy was based on Falcon 9, which had already been flying for a while, so there was a lot more heritage in the Falcon Heavy launch, and I think the relative confidence levels were much higher when compared to Starship. However, it is also worth mentioning that Starship, like we said, should launch from Starbase first, and that should give them more confidence before they bring it to 39A. So it's a worthwhile point, but a bit different of a situation, don't you think?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Let's see.
And again, reminder, we have a Falcon Heavy launch coming up later this month, too.
We do, hopefully, the USSF-44 mission, so that should be fun.
Yep.
That
That actually will be the first time that they're going to expand a booster. The center core is going to be expanded. That's actually
intentionally.
the first time.
It's not the first time they've done it unintentionally.
Intentionally.
Yeah, it's true.
And on purpose, they're going to expand a booster for the first time in 3 years. And man, that's even crazy to think about. That it's just so normal now. When a booster is just expanded, it's like, oh, this is crazy. It's totally opposite as it used to be.
And I should put out as a reminder, you can see the progress being worked on right now at 39A as they transition it from the Crew 5 Falcon 9 to USSF 44 Falcon Heavy over on Space Coast Live 2.
Sure.
Yep.
All right. Another super chat here from Lars saying, while we're all watching Starship and boosters being built, what updates do we have when it comes to cargo going to Mars? Unfortunately, I don't think there has been a whole lot of that. I think that, I know I've mentioned in the past that I'm definitely looking forward to SpaceX announcing what the payload manifest for like the first Mars landing attempts are going to be. What kind of equipment are they going to try to bring? Will the first one be empty for the most part, just focus on landing, or will they put some low stakes cargo on board, things like that? But unfortunately, there hasn't been a lot of updates on that, so we'll have to wait and see.
What a wheel of cheese.
A wheel of cheese, of course, and a Tesla Roadster for good measure. Let's see. How safe will stainless steel on Starship be for a crewed Starship flight? It seems too thin for a rocket. Any thoughts on that?
Well,
We'll see if anyone goes where I go.
you should look at Crew Dragon.
Crew Dragon?
But-
That's not where I thought you were going to go. What about Crew Dragon?
Well, it's aluminum sheets with milled kind of the panels inside are just basically milled aluminum sheets. For example, the pressure vessel itself, it's just aluminum. It's not really that thick of a thing. It's metal. It's not that is like a whole, few inches thick or something like that. It's just metal. It's a sheet of metal. Now the only difference here is that Dragon has outer panels of a spam, of a SpaceX proprietary ablative material and things like that to cover the outer part of the pressure vessel. But then again, I do know about a certain other spacecraft that was the lunar module for Apollo, for example, that had also a pressure vessel that was very thin as well. It also had an outer shell as well with mylar and things like that, and it was very not really that is strong in that sense. The ISS, the modules themselves, also like they have multiple layers as well on the outside and things like that. It looks like it is very thick, but again, it's like at the end of the day, it's just layers of metal sheets. So once they launch crew on Starship, maybe from the outside it's gonna be looking pretty much like the same, but from the inside it's gonna have all sorts of protection. So that's the big picture here. It's not gonna look like now. That's what I'm trying to say.
Gotcha.
Yeah, just don't drop any screws around it and you're fine.
Yep.
That's interesting because when we were talking about thin stainless steel, I assumed someone was going to go talk about Centaur, but that's apparently not where y'all went. But yeah, basically pretty common for aerospace structures to be very thin, and that's why we talk about like pressurization a lot. Pressurizing a thing like a booster or stuff like that is what gives it a little bit extra strength than just the thin metal on its own.
Right. I mean, that does always increase the risk of, dare I say the word, leaks, but yeah.
Yes. Alright, let's see. Moto Kenzo says, do you think they will test the flight termination system on one of these early, quote, landings over water? I don't think it's not very usual to actually do an FTS test or anything like that. So I wouldn't expect that, I don't think.
There is certainly the chance, I would assume, for an unplanned FTS test.
Well, sure.
But I don't think there's going to be an outright test like there was for in-flight abort for Crew Dragon.
I do wonder how that's gonna work, because for Falcon 9 the FTS is saved after re-entry, so it's not even close to the ground when it is saved. Yeah, it's gonna be interesting to know about that.
Well, yeah, and the reasoning is being once it gets lower than that, if a failure occurs, it's much safer for the booster to fall in one piece somewhere rather than spread a debris field across, like across the area that you're trying to land.
Yeah,
Right.
just like I think it was B1050. It was CRS-16, one of the one that you mentioned before, the return to launch site that failed, the only one that has failed so far. Yeah, it basically landed on the water because it didn't have enough. Yeah, it didn't have enough control to be able to go all the way to land.
Anyway, just keeping an eye on this booster. The booster's actually been moving around a little bit. The reason we haven't wrapped up is because they haven't really set the booster all the way down, and we're looking at that pin on the right too, which is retracted a little bit. So still settling the booster into the orbital launch mount.
Yeah, it takes a while until they actually get the position right. They move it with the stabilizers, and maybe the other pin, we cannot see it from here. There's another pin, like the one on the right, there's another one on the left. And that might be engaged already. The one on the right deployed, but it's not on the socket there on the HPU box. So maybe it's because the booster is not well aligned. Oh, and just as I say that,
Speak of the devil.
yep, it's going all the way in.
All
See,
you
I
have to
gotta
do
complain
is,
more
is
about
complain
this.
about things, and then they get fixed, you know?
Yep.
And speak it into existence.
Let's see here. Well, SpaceX put extra mass on the human-rated Starship because it will probably be higher than 3 Gs. I don't think it's like, okay, the initial like Elon has said that the liftoff for a Starship Super Heavy full stack is going to be somewhere around a thrust to weight ratio of 1.5. That's not a 3G acceleration. But also, the Raptor engines can throttle, and so as it gets faster, and as the vehicle drains its propellant and it comes lighter, and so it can accelerate harder, you can throttle those Raptor engines to control your G loading, and same thing on the Starship itself. I don't think the solution to that is to add extra mass. I think it's just to throttle your Raptor engines. And given that Raptor is designed to propulsively land the vehicles, it has some pretty wide throttling capability. So I don't think adding extra mass is going to be what you need there. Thank you, Michael, for pointing out the pin on the orbital launch mount that we're talking
Here.
about that is just
Yeah.
attached to the booster here.
With a happy face and all.
Yep.
There you
By the
go.
way, they are going to have to add extra mass, but it's not for that reason. The extra mass will likely be the ECLSS, the Environmental Control and Life Support Systems, that allows humans to actually be alive on board.
Let's see. I'm going to bring in some more questions here while we wait for them to just settle the booster the rest of the way down now. Hopefully they're at that point here soon. People still asking about is Ship 24 going to be on top of Booster 7 during the 33 engine firing. It's possible, however, we don't think it's necessary, but it's possible that just ends up being the testing schedule based on Ship 24 sitting next to the launch mount right now. But yeah, it's a little unclear how exactly they're going to round out booster testing and move into full stack testing. So, alright, what else we got? Yeah, and of course they do have to. There's other closeout work to do. We've pointed out the bottom of the chines that has like that panel basically missing that they were clearly working on. So they've got work to do there. They've got a Raptor engine to install. There's that Raptor engine. You can see it on the left-hand side of your screen, sitting below the booster, all wrapped up. But they're going to have to install that. But yeah, I think there's still more testing to do on the booster. They've only fired 7 of the 33 engines, so at once. So I don't know. I would feel weird if they went to like 33 engines or to ship stacking like quickly. But I don't know. Yeah, it's
As
interesting.
mentioned,
I would
there's-
like to get some more insight into that testing schedule. Go ahead, sir.
I was going to say, also, there's still the mount points that we were talking about for the crane on top of 24 also. Whether
Yes,
those
that's
stay or
true.
not, we don't know, but it's still in that configuration as well.
All right. Keep an eye. I'll pick up another question here really quick. See, Ghost Dragon asking if there's any idea if the platforms can be used for launch or just catching. Maybe the concept is both. What do you think, Sawyer? Those sea launch platforms, are they going to be launch platforms, landing platforms, both?
I
Neither,
personally see
they'll
them
cancel? I don't know.
as... I could see them more along the lines of both. I mean, it's a great vantage point there of, being able to have that at-sea launch point. But I think it could be great, as I was talking about earlier, maybe down the line if Starship ends up doing point to point, as has been discussed before, those could be kind of midpoints that keep it far enough away from land, but close enough that once you land, it's easy to get back to a port of some kind. So I think it could in the future be used for both, but right now I could see it more for launch than landing.
Yeah, what do you think, Alex?
I'm not really sure, to be honest. We have been talking about the whole deal of maybe maybe they test half of the engines without the ship, for example. Maybe they do test it with the ship on top. It's really just a wait and see.
Yeah.
Oh
A
god,
lot of times there are
this is
like very clear signs as to what they're going to do, and that's what we're talking about. Like, well, this is why we think they're going to do this next, and unfortunately, we do. Other than, well, they have to put the booster on the launch mount eventually, so that's probably the next step. But after that, it's kind of unclear. So it really is unfortunately a wait and see game. However, you can wait and see by tuning into the NASASpaceflight YouTube channel, and you can find out along with us. So that's what I think we're going to be keeping an eye on. Still waiting for the booster to be set the rest of the way down, but they should be finishing up the lift operation. I do want to thank everyone who has sent support to our stream and our coverage, and thanks for tuning in. If you would like another way to support what we do here at NASA Spaceflight, one of the best ways you can do that is by supporting us on the NASASpaceflight.com shop. Which includes a whole lot of things, different shirts and things like that. One of our most popular things has been the metal prints, and we've added a bunch recently. There's a whole bunch from the recent Delta IV Heavy launch out from Vandenberg. There's also the new solar transit photo from the Falcon 9 launch from Vandy the other day that Jack got. All of your favorite rockets from the NSF team are immortalized in a metal print form, if you will. Plenty of Starship stuff on there, of course. And if you want to check that out, we're always adding new photos to the metal print, so keep checking back and look and find something you like. It's one of the best ways that you can support what we do at NSF. All of that support goes into expanding and improving our coverage. So thanks to everyone who supports us that way. We really appreciate it. There's some cool stuff on that shop. And
as
yeah,
always,
we also
go ahead.
Great
photographers. I will just like to point that out as well. We have really very very talented photographers.
Yes.
Pauline, Stephen, you, Michael, Jack. Yeah, I think there's also one from Julia as well. I think.
Yeah, I think there's at least one Julia. I remember there's at least one Falcon 9 from Julia in there. Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's some married photos too, and yeah.
We have a little bit of everyone there, so that's super great.
Also got some other super chat support in here, so thank you everyone for sending support that way. John Dubker says, for the man with the epic beard bacon fund, don't think he had enough in that update vid. So we'll make sure Jack gets his bacon fund. Appreciate that. And Jim Cabot says, later nerds. Appreciate Jim, and thank you for the support there. Let's see, what other questions we got while we wait for SpaceX to get this booster down? Let's see here. How did each of the NSF commentators become so excited about space? Asked Jeremy Sparks. Rocket launches are cool, so I watched a lot of rocket launches, and then something happened to make rocket launches stop happening, and I was upset about that. So I became invested in spaceflight to make sure that we could keep launching rockets, and when rockets didn't work, that's what prevents us from continuing to explore space. So I wanted to get involved to make sure that we would keep exploring. Sawyer, what got you into space? You haven't been on an NSF stream to answer this question before. We get asked this question every once in a while, but what got you into it?
Well, I actually started as I was a summer camper at the Challenger Centers for Space Science Education, of which there are over 50 of them across the country and now the world, founded by the families of the Challenger STS-51L crew, where they basically do STEM outreach, space education, and they have simulated space missions that they run as well. And I went there for summer camp, and I joked that I became the camper that never left, as I then worked with the organization for over 12 years. And the first time I was there as a camper was STS-118, when Barbara Morgan became the first educator into orbit. And it was just so cool, seeing all these things happen live and following the mission. and that's when I became addicted and wanted to know everything I could about space. And so that's when I really got invested, learning more, joined some internet communities back in the day, ended up creating a podcast about it, and been talking about space ever since. And I love it. And the first launch I saw was STS-130 back in 2010, and that's how I caught the launch bug. I was hooked instantly, got to see STS-135 at the press site, and yeah, over 3 dozen launches later, we're still loving it.
That's awesome. Alex, what do you think? What got you into the spaceflight world?
To me, it was documentaries about galaxies and stars and things like that. It was mostly astrophysics at first. I went into dive into all these things about astrophysics, and in the meantime, I used to play a lot of different games. They are going down with a booster, I think now. See, it's right when I speak when they do things.
There you go. I'll just keep asking you questions and then we can wrap up,
Yeah, so I used to play games like not games but like simulators, Orbital spaceflight simulator, just basically to like dive into more of a spaceflight stuff, and that's how I ended up getting into the bug of a spaceflight instead of going more like astrophysics. I still love astrophysics, but I also love spaceflight, like rockets and spacecraft and things like that. So yeah. I fell in love with the ISS.
There you go. That's awesome. All right, bringing in some other super chat questions. We're still getting in here. Let's see here. Steven says a floating oil rig platform would be a great sea launch option, very stable and can be towed and allows vertical integration. Thoughts? Huh, weird. I wonder if SpaceX has thought about that. Oh wait! Once upon a time, SpaceX bought 2 oil rigs. They're named Phobos and Deimos. They're currently in port. I forget where exactly. I think is one in Pascagoula and one in.
Both there now, I think.
Or they're both in Pascagoula now. That's
Yeah.
and they're basically old oil platforms that SpaceX has bought, presumably to be used as launch platforms, but not exactly a high priority as they're focusing on first launches from Starbase and things like that. But they have basically had that same thought, so. David's saying, so is this all automated now? Don't see any people. There are no people at the site. They clear out the launch site for this. But I still believe some of it is remote control rather than automated per se. And they just control it remotely. It would be interesting to talk to Elon or something about like how automated this system is now and how automated it will be eventually. Like, can it be like press a button to tell it, all right, stack booster on the mount, and it just does the rest with its sensors and things like that? That would be cool, but not sure. Let's see here. What in the heck is this question? What in the Kerbal? Could it be possible to put an Electron second stage on a Firefly Alpha second stage, Neutron second stage on a Falcon 9 second stage in the Starship cargo bay? No, I don't think it is.
That just gave me a headache.
Was that all the space industries? Because that sounds a lot.
It's not, but he's gonna give them an idea, like Electron second stage on a Firefly second stage on a Neutron second stage on a. I don't even think the Falcon 9 second stage is gonna take up a lot of the Starship cargo bay. I don't know if you got room for all the other stuff in there. Sheesh. Someone should try that in Kerbal. Anyway, moving on.
Oh my goodness.
Night of Kerbal crimes. There you go.
There you go. What kind of jellyfish effect can we expect with Starship when they eventually at some point launch a Twilight mission? I mean, it should be, the physics is the same as any other rocket doing a Twilight launch, but the plume should be maybe bigger simply because there's a couple more engines firing than usual. So maybe a Twilight Starship launch will probably be spectacular. That would be... that's a new thing I had not thought about before, so now I'm looking forward to that.
Oh, don't tease me like that. But yeah, it's basically take a look at whatever the smoke trail is going to be or the exhaust plume, as it goes higher up in the atmosphere during normal flights, and then just imagine it even more expanded and beautiful colors.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm just looking forward to seeing Starships like different launch profiles. Like on Falcon 9, we say like, okay, there's the drone ship landings, the return to launch site landings. There's also the different inclinations, flying up the coast, flying due east, polar corridor stuff. And it's definitely interesting to see what the kind of flight profiles for orbital Starship Super Heavy stacks are going to take, and what, today we're like, oh, well, it's another Starlink mission. They all look the same. Like, it'll be interesting to have that conversation about Starship launches, but we got a long way to go, and I'm also equally looking forward to the static fire testing and things that are going to come up, the wet dress rehearsals and full stack and things like that. That today's stacking Booster 7 on the orbital launch mount is setting up for. There'll be a bit more work to do before we can resume into testing, but hopefully this week they can get into that.
Yep, keep getting closer and closer to eventual orbital test flight.
Yeah, it's super exciting. This is, again, I mean, I don't know if we said this last time. I don't know if last time we were like, this is probably not the last time. But this time, in theory, this is the last time they've rolled out Booster 7 and put it on the launch mount, because it should launch. I did say that the last time SLS rolled out, and a lot of people clowned me for that on Twitter. So I'm going to hedge here. I'm just gonna hedge for a little bit, but it is possible.
This vehicle has no liquid hydrogen, though.
There's no liquid hydrogen on Starship. Methane and oxygen are both heavier molecules. Or not heavier. Well, heavier, but also bigger is the actual problem. Again, keep an eye on the booster, which is just settling down still into the launch mount. We expect it to just settle down a little bit farther, and we just want to make sure that they're finished to the lift before we end up our coverage, so still taking a couple questions here and there. But yeah, you can see that the pin has the stabilizer pin on the launch mount has attached, and so the booster should just settle down a little bit more for them to be finished with the lift process, is why we're still around. But yeah, what other questions we got here? Yeah, Sean asking about if that second tower they've got parts for at KSC is for catching safely away from 39A for some initial catch attempts. And actually, this was something we talked about during the most recent KSC flyover video, about how some people have speculated about putting a tower at like landing zone 1 or something like that. Alex, what do you think about that possibility?
I don't think they're gonna put a tower there at landing zone 1. I do know that, it's a spoiler, but someone in our team said it could be a possibility, but that's their opinion. It's a wrong one. I'm joking. But yeah, my opinion is that no, they're not gonna use landing zone 1 or landing zone 2 for any tower there. Mostly because they're still using it. The Falcon Heavy later this month on October 28th. Right now, it's the launch date being looked at. That actually is going to be doing double landings back on land on LC1 and LC2. So it's going to be used, and we know that there's going to be a couple of more flights down the line with RTLS, and it's still being useful because it cuts down on the time that they need for turnarounds, especially when you're talking about the fact that they're targeting 100 launches next year with Falcon 9. You gotta think about how important it is to have from time to time an RTLS landing, because that doesn't constrain your barges, the drone ships, because the drone ships right now are mostly the driver for turnarounds. Right now, it's basically all that matters. The pads are mostly ready in 4 or 5 days for another rocket. So, but the drone ships cannot be turned around that fast. So actually having an RTLS launch every now and then, imagine if they have had the Falcon Heavy instead of landing back on land. It was originally planned to be double drone ship landing for the USSF 44 mission. Now it is double RTLS. But imagine if that were to happen in the crazy cadence that they have right now. They will have both drone ships offline for probably a week or two. So it's super important right now for them to obviously have from time to time some RTLS mission to be able to have another launch in the manifest,
Hmm.
but not needing the drone ships. That's super important right now.
And by expending the core on the upcoming Falcon Heavy as well, there's no drone ship needed for those landings as well. So as soon as Falcon Heavy's over, you've got 2 more ships. You've got Shorefollow Gravitas and Just Read the Instructions ready to go back out.
You're right on. That like they could just basically do a Starlink launch from Path 40 the next day, or the day
Yeah.
prior, or heck, even the same day. We've seen them attempting launches within 24 hours, right? So it wouldn't be unheard of for them to do that.
Right. I got another question here, one more from Alejandro. Not you, Alejandro, different Alejandro. Could we see deliveries of Starship from Boca Chica to Florida by suborbital flight? We talked about ferry flights earlier and how that could be a thing down the road, but we actually do know that the initial vehicles are going to be transported from Starbase to Florida via barge, via ship, and probably offloaded at the Term Basin where we saw some Blue Origin hardware arrive. That's where SLS hardware arrives. And that's from an Elon tweet like a week or so ago. Maybe eventually there is a space flight where you launch from Boca and land in Florida. You probably wouldn't do a suborbital flight because then you're overflying. Well, I mean, you're kind of overflying Florida when you re-enter anyway. So maybe it depends. But one day, sure. But in the near term, they're actually planning on just ocean transport of the vehicles, the first vehicles that will be tested in Florida, since that production facility won't be online yet. But a good question there.
At that point, though, you would be higher over Florida for reentry, kind of like
Yeah.
how Crew Dragon does now. So it's less of a risk to the population below than 33 engine booster or Starship 24 flying overhead.
Right. I don't think you could even get a booster to reach Florida anyway. Like ship you could do, but booster I don't think has the energy to go from Texas to Florida. The downrange, even a downrange landing wouldn't quite reach that far, I don't think. But anyway, the booster has, I think, settled down about as low as we're going to see here. Again, to recap, Booster 7, which was rolled out to the launch site late last week, has been lifted and installed onto the orbital launch mount, and what we'll be doing this week is keeping an eye on that Raptor engine below the booster, which they'll probably install here shortly, and any other preparatory work needed before Booster 7 resumes its test campaign, and whether or not that will include a full stack or if the full stack's coming later. But what we're going to do is we're going to throw you over to Starbase Live really quick. It's been myself, Thomas Burkhart, as well as Alex on commentary and Sawyer on commentary with me. Alex and Sawyer, thank you both so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having us on. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was my mistake for thanking you both at the same time. But anyway, we're gonna throw you over to Starbase Live so you can keep an eye on all the happenings down at Starbase. So thank you all so much for watching and stay tuned for future coverage. See you later.